in general, coffee, whether good or bad to your taste or not, is the flavor version of watching a horror movie, where the point is for it to be just short of intolerable so that you get something out of it that
Absolutely.
like this is completely a hot take and unfounded by any science. I really do think that a lot of our enjoyment of things like coffee and strong spirits is the thrill of survival.
The future of food is being created as we speak, and the science fiction of today might become the science fact of tomorrow. I'm your host, Mike Lee. I'm a food futurist, innovator, and author. Each week, we explore today's signals to reveal tomorrow's possibilities. We'll challenge assumptions, we'll question conventional wisdom, we'll imagine what could be, and talk to the innovators who are shaping what will be. This is the Tomorrow Today Show. Let's get started. Hello, world. Welcome to today's episode on the future of flavor. Today, we're asking, what is flavor really? And what will it become as technology, culture, and the planet evolve? From seed to simulation, flavor is being reimagined. And we have some great guests who have been shaping the future of flavor on with us today. Today, we're going to hear from Mario Ubiali of Thymus, a company studying how flavor is experienced in the brain. We're going to dive into perception, craving, and neurogastronomy with him. We'll also talk with Ori Zohar, co-founder of Burlap and Barrel, about the spice trade, global flavor heritage, and what we're overlooking in our spice racks. Stick around to the very end for a special bonus interview with Mette Johnsen, CEO of Spora, the innovative company behind the creative engine at Alchemist in Copenhagen, one of the most boundary-pushing restaurants in the world. But I am not alone here, of course, as usual. My guest co-host today is none other than Ali Bouzari. He's a food scientist, chef, author of Ingredient, and co-founder of the food design and formulation company Pilot R&D. He's helped shape products for fine dining and big food brands alike, bridging science and deliciousness. Ali, how are you today?
Hi, Mike. I'm
Good to
good.
see you. All right, let's start at the beginning here. To understand the future, it's good to understand where we've come from. How do you define flavor? Not just as a scientist, but someone who kind of lives and breathes food every day. And maybe, how has that understanding of flavor evolved over time?
Yeah, I think it's one of the most familiar words that we understand the least frequently, like random people on the street. I would define flavor most simply as your body taking in information and your brain sorting through it and coming up with an impression of how it makes you feel. And there's a million other facets that we can get into it, but the intersection between all of our chemical and physical senses feeding us data to crunch, and then all of the weird baggage that you and your brain and your history and your biases and your preferences bring to the table.
Yeah.
That's why I think we're never going to solve it. To spoil some of the questions later on, it is the most fascinating, delicious black hole that we're ever going to try to study.
Well, that idea of solving it even just sounds funny, like saying it. Like we talk about how AI computers solved chess, right? By kind of being the best player. Like, I mean, I know we probably will never get there, but like, what would that even mean to solve flavor?
I don't know, but it would be so bleak. I
Bleak, because we just kind of would leave one of the, I don't know, it seems like a piece of humanity would just fall away.
The mystery would fall away. It'd be like the first time that you saw like your parents crying. There's some loss of innocence would happen. But fortunately, I don't think it's likely. I think that I'm not a tech skeptic. I'm not a technology skeptic. I'm a tech culture. I'm aggravated by tech culture. And I think that there's a lot of ways where this very analog, primordial thing that happens inside of our mouths and brains when we eat stuff is going to have a lot to talk about and engage with and exchange with technology. but technology isn't going to solve it any more than technology is ever going to be like, here's what love is. You can just skip it and let's just procreate.
Yeah, exactly.
Technology can aid us in those things and augment our experience, but there is a fundamental biology, chemistry, physics, and maybe metaphysical side of all of this that I don't think is ever going to be digitized
Yeah.
or be fully grasped.
Well, because it goes way beyond just the chemical reactions when food hits your tongue, right, and your nose. Because I call it sort of this. There's this paradox I kind of think of called like the mom's pancakes problems, where no chef will ever be able to make pancakes better than your mother, even if your mother's pancakes are objectively terrible. You can't compete with that context of being like a 7-year-old and running downstairs watching cartoons and your mom or dad is making pancakes for you, right? Like, throw as many Michelin stars as you want. Like, we're never going to beat that. And that doesn't really fall into the realm of what a chef can necessarily control.
Yeah, and that's why you can solve chess. You might even be able, like, sports. There's a lot of conversation over the past decade and a half about solving basketball with threes and layups and solving football with spread offense versus run game and all this stuff. That's debatable because there's still all of this just entropy of human athletic performance and what can happen and things like that. I buy that you could solve chess. I would entertain the notion that a sport might be solved. I don't think flavor will ever be fully figured out by the definition of figuring out, meaning we have all the answers. Because if the chess example is a great one. One could argue that if you're playing against another human, playing the player in addition to playing what's on the board is part of it. Setting up a strategy and trying to get people to fall into traps is part of it. Computers can talk to each other and figure out objectively the best way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
If you remove the emotion and human experience, which can be a hindrance in a game of pure strategy, from flavor, you have removed flavor.
Yeah.
Like, this is the ultimate, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, does it make a sound? Duh. Yes, it makes a sound. There is still air. There's still means of conveying sound waves. I've always thought that's a dumb philosophical question. But if you make a perfectly optimized, calibrated food unit and no one is around to enjoy it, I would argue it has no flavor.
Yeah. Well, and I would even build on that and say part of the reason why we can never maybe solve flavor is because we're all too different, right?
Yeah.
Maybe
And
yeah, go ahead.
We are all too different. There is no objective right choice. Like, we love to flame politicians for really enjoying like hammered beyond well done steak, but that's not a wrong choice. Like, that's the smash burger idea,
Yeah.
where it's like more Maillard browning, more crispiness. You're giving that as a trade off for juiciness, and maybe that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody has such different preferences and such different context that I think a big part of what we do as people who help others develop new dishes and products and figure out how to make real what is in their head, a lot of what we have to do is kind of become these decentralized, like, you almost have to inhabit somebody else's skin.
Yeah.
And when we're making a chocolate bar that has mint in it, there are multiple members of our team who despise mint in all forms, and you have to be able to fracture your brain and think about things. It's almost like flavor empathy. Be like, if I did like mint, does this feel like it's properly balanced with everything else?
Yeah.
And that's a major part of what we do beyond just knowing how to cook or beyond just knowing science.
Well, that's a really fun part of being able to cook and make food for people is trying to like get that empathy on with them. Like you and I have been in a lot of these conversations, and we've obviously been in them on our own. Where I say something like, for instance, I hate boneless chicken wings. However, if you were to like task me with trying to identify a boneless chicken wing that would succeed with people who love boneless chicken wings, it's kind of a fun exercise to try to like inhabit that. Like, okay, let's imagine I do like this food. What would it be like to make the perfect boneless chicken wing,
Totally. And it chefs do it. I think people who are making products for retail arguably do it a little bit better. Um, or maybe they do a more thorough job of trying to put yourself in somebody else's shoes,
Yeah.
because when you're a chef at a restaurant, you have so much. You're a megalomaniac. Like, you control every aspect of a person's existence while they're in your care,
Hmm.
and you can force your agenda in like an awesome way, in a benevolent way. This is why we love restaurants. But you can force somebody to have a good time if you're a chef at a
Yeah.
restaurant. Somebody who's like picking up a granola bar, you can't control whether or not they hate apples and they grab the apple cinnamon one and not the blueberry vanilla one. You can't control whether they're gonna leave it in their car in Fresno, go on a 3-day trip and come back and have it be completely liquefied in a puddle.
Yeah.
You can't control whether they're going to eat it in a rush to a meeting where they think they might get fired, and are thus bringing just the absolute most chaotic emotional baggage to the table that you can imagine. Uh, Retail food is crazy because it's this super intimate experience with somebody that you're never going to meet,
Huh?
and that's wild.
Yeah. Well, so I wanted to touch on that later, but since you brought it up, I think now's a good segue to it. So, in a couple sentences, kind of just give people the background who might not know what's your day job, so to speak, and what's Pilot R&D, because that's useful context for talking about this divide between making flavor for CPG and making flavor for restaurants.
Yeah. My job is to be a day walker. So I am half food scientist, half chef. We call what we do culinary science. It's like food science but with a point, or chefery but with a plan. And uh, uh, the day job is, I'm one of the co-founders of Pilot R&D, and we do product development and scale up primarily for brands who want to launch new CPG products. So we help people with beverages and candy and sauces and snacks and frozen foods and pasta and everything. I always say everything except for pet food and infant formula, because I don't want to.
I don't
One has
want
a lot
to.
of liability and one is dog food, and I
It's
don't
great.
want
It's a
to
great
get into
example.
either of those. Um, and but me and my partners all come from a world where we were helping chefs in the fine dining world do R&D for years and years and years, until 10 years ago we started Pilot. And there's a lot of through lines. There's a lot of understand the fundamentals of the science of flavor, understand the fundamentals of how to cook food and make it do what you want it to, and equip yourself as best as possible to be in like a defensive crouch for whatever curveball food throws your way, because it will. But yeah, I spend all day helping people solve problems with food doing not what they want to, and every day is a little different.
So that's an interesting context because I think putting all the things as the practical needs aside of CPG, like food safety and scalability, put those aside for a second. Just talking about like crafting pure flavor. If you've got a restaurant, right, you know you've got a lot of tricks in your bag to enhance the eating experience, right? You could pour the sauce tableside. You can tell a great story about it. You can control the mood lighting and the table, and all of these things kind of piggyback on top of the flavor of the dish, and they probably just add up to like a 1 + 1 = 20 kind of thing. And you pointed out very astutely, like CPG doesn't have that. You kind of put a bar in a package, and 3 months later, somebody eats it and whatever. So, like, does that change the way you kind of approach how to build flavor into a thing, knowing that you've really don't have all those other tools at your disposal that a restaurant has?
Yeah, and I think there are so many brands making food for retail now, and there's so many different ways to categorize them. I think there's people who are in the natural organic channel, people who really want functional food, people who are pro this or anti that in terms of trying to help people along their food journey. I think that the two most clearly defined buckets are brands who say, this is a product that we think people will like, and brands that say, this is a product that we like. Let's see what other people say. And we've seen successes on both sides. But I'm always a little interested by the brands that just let it rip because they think that something is awesome and they're like, there should be a market for this thing. Let's put it out there. I'm always interested by that because we've seen those kinds of like passion driven, flavor originated ideas or whatever you want to call them really thrive. We've also seen them fail. We've equally, I think, seen the most meticulously researched and focus grouped products thrive and fail. And I think that in a restaurant, you put a special on the menu. If you have 18 of them to sell and 5 of them go, and nobody really wanted to order the thing poached in a pig bladder, then you know that your clientele is not down for like digging into the 18th century classics just yet.
Yeah.
That's a lower risk turnaround to just like tinker and like baby step to figure out where you're at. In a CPG brand, that little experiment costs like $1 million.
Yeah.
To launch a brand, put it out in the hands of the people, have them say, oh, you thought that we were buying this because it's organic. We're buying it because it's passion fruit and chocolate, and that's what we really wanted. And those can be expensive lessons to learn. And so there is a lot more. It's funny to say, but I think there is a lot more witchcraft and mysticism in the success of a CPG product than there is in a restaurant. I think in a restaurant you can like feel around with your hands of even if the lights are off in a room, metaphorically speaking, you can kind of feel around and see where you are. In CPG, you're in a stadium with the lights off, and you just have to like throw a ball in a direction and hope somebody's there to catch it. And a lot of what we do is help people like get the best throw they can by making the product that they want to make and helping them figure out ingredient sourcing and the cost of their ingredients and how to make it consistently and reliably. But at the end of the day, like trying to figure out if America as an aggregate is going to like something is why we're still telling these hilarious stories of like Hollywood film and TV execs, like the visionary who had an idea to greenlight Die Hard, and all of the sheep who greenlit Die Hard but on a boat, but on a plane, but in a taxi. And it's like, I don't know. I think it was all dumb luck when it really, really came down to it. And so the best thing all of those people could do was make the best thing that they had, make an educated guess of where it was going to go, and then let chaos decide.
I think about that metaphor so much. I just started the Apple TV show, The Studio, which is actually really, really great. But it's this age-old question of like, let's do a blockbuster for the studio, and some actor wants to do a Daniel Day-Lewis period piece for them, right? And it's the reason why that I think like you look at the yogurt aisle. Every brand has the same first 5 flavors, and then depending how big the brand is, the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10 can be like, purple raspberry dragon fruit, right? But everybody's got to have the strawberry, the blueberry. I mean, those are like Marvel movies, right? It's the foundation. It's going to sell. Okay, so I'm trying to ride a line in this podcast episode because the future of flavor to some might come off as Mike and Ali and others are going to predict what next year's flavor is going to be. I do not want to do that because I think that's a fool's errand. And I think it's just got not as interesting, honestly, because you could you could matcha. No, it's matcha.
No, I'm just going to, I am earnestly going to push the sumac agenda until it happens because I have failed spectacularly for 10 years.
I'm with you on that too. I do like the sumac thing, but I think like I'm more interested in exploring kind of just humanity's relationship to flavor. So maybe take a step back to the beginning of your career when you first started with food and just like what have you observed in kind of the people's collective relationship to flavor, and like how has that maybe evolved as you've gotten to today?
It's evolved in a lot of ways. I think it's really hard to put your finger on one single trend outside of the one, I think, true trend that we have seen, that there's a higher percentage of people who think about flavor, who think about eating experiences and get a little excited about them, get a little worried about them. There's just more engagement with eating now than 15, 20 years ago. Um, I watched American Psycho for the first time recently. And
First time. Wow,
first
you're
time, it
catching
was when,
up.
we all have our like pop culture blind spots. I always try to like patch mine up whenever I can, but first time watching it, and the thing that caught me the most was just like how eater coded it was.
Yeah.
Like there is so much conversation about this hot restaurant in New York and this crazy shrimp tower that they're building or whatever. And at the time, like that's a really great crystallization of like that time period where we were just coming out of the notion that caring about food and having opinions about food automatically made you a yuppie.
Yeah.
It automatically made you a certain type of materialistic status monger.
Yeah.
And restaurants might have reflected that for a while, and food might have reflected that for a while. And I think the advent of all of this choice and all of this variety and diversity that we can choose from in our day-to-day lives, the coolest thing that I think has come from this and will hopefully continue to come from this is just more people are involved in the conversation because there's like more teams you can root for. You don't have to be a Le Bernardin versus a Taco Bell person.
Hmm.
And honestly, most Le Bernardin people I know are also Taco Bell people.
Yeah.
It is me. But like it is no longer like so many things. It's no longer binary, and that's awesome. There's so much middle ground, and there's so many different spins on it that similar to music, it's not that you're a wax record collector or you only listen to top 40. Now, if you are into Swedish fife metal, you can find 6 bands that do that and have their entire discography available to you. If you are really into uh, Mexican and Taiwanese hybrid food ideas, not just fusion uh, Southwest spring roll at a chain restaurant, but like if you are into people who are half Mexican, half Taiwanese, cooking awesome food that is a blend of the things they grew up eating, you might find like 3 options for pop-ups in your area to go do that right now.
Yeah.
And that I think is more important and more awesome and more worthy of celebration than any other innovation that has happened in food, is just everybody has an opportunity now to be engaged.
Let me playfully challenge that. Do you think that it goes only one way? Like, is that timeline of it going from conservative to expansive, like the direction of time? You can't go backwards in it, or do you think it's plausible that one day some generation, like our kids' generation, is like, ah, mom and dad, they're all exploring all this stuff. Like, I just want to eat mashed potatoes. Like, or
I think it's
have you seen that happen in the past already? Even like the back and
yeah,
forth.
yeah. This is where we're going to start getting into the tricky stuff because um, I don't think that we've all of a sudden ripped the roof off and everyone in every part, let's just say the United States, which is already an impossibly diverse population to generalize. But let's say every corner of the United States, it's not like everybody is into gochujang.
Uh-huh.
But I think for the first time in maybe human history, there is a plausible path to envision where, like a couple years from now, everyone could be aware of what gochujang is.
Uh-huh.
And the fact that that learning curve is a couple of years and not half a century is like it is revolutionary. I love to talk about a Super Bowl ad that was like 9 years ago, where a guy brought quinoa patties to a tailgate, and it was probably an insurance commercial because they all are. But the whole bit of this commercial was that nobody even knew how to pronounce the name. And this guy's looking at the package and he's like, "What the hell is a quinoa?" And then by the end of the commercial, the like hero's journey is this guy's like standing in a arms akimbo Superman pose, and he's like, somebody asks him, "What the hell is this thing?" And he's like, "It's a quinoa," and he like says it like proudly, looking up at the sky from his grill where this like really wretched looking quinoa patty is burning. We have come from that being the zeitgeist, is what the hell is quinoa,
Yeah.
to I think like most people now understand what quinoa is
Yeah.
uh remarkably quickly.
Yeah.
It took us so long to figure out hummus. It took 15, 20, like there was a hummus joke in Aladdin, in the original animated Aladdin.
Yeah.
And it was a joke because this was a uh, story set in the Middle East, and Robin Williams was riffing on like the one Middle Eastern food he knew.
Yeah.
And now hummus is like, it's not a rural urban thing, but like you can find hummus. I drive a lot. You can find hummus on this in a like convenient gas station cold case on the side of an interstate in any state in the United States.
Yeah.
And that has taken us to uncharted territory, because not that everybody is going to like all the same stuff, but everybody for the first time ever has the opportunity to like, or to learn to like,
Mhm.
anything and everything.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
everybody's going to. We're still going to have conservative eaters. We're still going to have people, and we see this every day, even people that like I'm related to. There are reticent eaters, and they're like, "I know that's your thing, and we'll try it, and etc." It's still going to take somebody uh 20 tries before they create a new food habit where they like really understand
Yeah.
and crave kimchi if they've
Yeah.
never had a slightly funky pickle in their life before.
Mhm.
But if somebody has any inkling to do so, the opportunities are going to be more abundant than they ever have been before. And that
Yeah.
is so powerful that we have no idea where it's going to take us yet.
Yeah, and I think when they have, sometimes it feels like there's a step function for when these things are introduced, because you think about like mid-level restaurants like Chili's, Applebee's, like Wingstop, Buffalo Wild Wings, and stuff like that. They have chefs working there that probably eat more at the same kind of restaurants we like to eat at to celebrate than their maybe clientele does, and they can go to like Noma and experience 42 things and say like which one of those could go on the Buffalo Wild Wings menu, right? And that's how you end up with Nashville hot chicken or gochujang wings on the Buffalo Wild Wings like menu, right? And so I feel like it's when you put that exploration in the hands of somebody who has control over like 1,000 stores, it kind of jettisons something to the top. Um, I asked about the kind of bouncing back kind of thing because I'd love to get your impression if you've seen this, and I think I know the answer, but it seems like if you kind of map out the career trajectory of a chef over the last 20 years, like let's say you graduated from culinary school in 2000 and now you're 25 years into it. Seems like a lot of chefs go through this curve of wanting to be young and brash and trying to do a lot, right? Like peak WD-50 molecular I hate that term. You know what I mean? That whole thing. Let's have 42 components on the pickup. And then they kind of do that for a while. Some stay there and do that. But then more often than not, I've observed is that chefs tend to mellow out a little bit more. And their dishes now are just like a piece of aged duck breast with honey, you know? Like, do you what do you make of that? Like, do you think that's something there? And why does it feel like so many people seem to go down that path?
There's a lot. There's a lot to talk about there. I will say the duck breast with lacquered with honey, it's probably a 46 step prep. Like,
Yeah.
a lot of times chefs love to talk about Oh yeah, man. I'm just all about getting back to the basics and just doing a beautiful piece of fish and perfectly cooked grains. And those grains are like a medley of 17 different wild seeds and pseudo cereals that are hand polished by like 14 commis, and
Yeah.
the piece of fish has gone through 17 steps to make it as good as it possibly can. I think a lot of the like, this is really complicated or this is really simple. In high end fine dining, everything is uber complicated, always. The aesthetic can appear simple, but this isn't just stuff that you can be like, I'm out in the wilderness with nobody to help me. I'm just going to cook like they're cooking at Noma because they're all about ingredients. Like
Yeah.
that is amazing marketing. But every fine dining restaurant experience anybody has ever had has been a sheer force of will and fear and resource exhaustion to get all that stuff on the plate. That said, I think that there is a I think there's stuff you can read between the lines on when we go through changing of the guard in the aesthetics of food, and it can be a like kind of fun barometer for what people are bringing to the table from their outside lives. The more stable and optimistic and hopeful and excited we get about the future, the more we're down to like get into some steampunk, like really jarring aesthetics.
Mm-hmm.
The more that we're like, oh my God, I can't believe it's only May. How has this year been 17 years of experience in one? The more we're like, you know what? I really could just use the best porridge I've ever had.
Yeah.
But that porridge is still going to take 17 steps. I don't buy that any chef actually calms down. I think chef the arc of going towards simplicity is an aesthetic choice, not a technique choice.
But that's a part of the flavor too. Yeah, and I think that's what I was actually kind of alluding to is that it does still tell me something that they have chosen to give the impression of simplicity, even though it's perceived, right? Because like one of my favorite old cooking shows that's only on like a YouTube channel is you ever see the old they did this like 6-part documentary about Marco Pierre White where they sent a journalist into Marco's kitchen and it's on like BB. You would love it.
No, that sounds awesome.
They sent a very sometimes unprepared journalist, female journalist, into Marco's kitchen and had her just shadow him and all of his just insanity, right? And you see like the plating is so baroque and it's got like just all kinds of shit. And then you fast forward to Noma, which, yes, I agree, is the same amount of behind the scenes difficulty, but like they're putting out like a thing that looks like just a sea urchin they cracked open, you know? So I think that's interesting. Um, you mentioned earlier an interesting idea that segues into another question, which is that idea of like, are we feeling optimistic and safe and we can go balls to the wall on some insane plate versus stressed out? We just want that porridge. With kind of the world as it is today and potentially kind of like world countries trying to isolate each other from each other and things like that, like how much credence do you give that like something like geopolitics could play into how people, the kind of aesthetic and the kind of flavors people crave, like going forward?
We spent uh, weeks a couple of years ago figuring out how to pull anything made out of sunflowers out of every product that anybody was making because 70% of the world's sunflower supply comes from Ukraine.
Lord.
I mean, it was one of those like immediate impacts. Um, uh, every possible facet of the food industry is being impacted. In theory, people are battening down the hatches for tariff shenanigans. Um, and then it changes beyond that. There was a massive drought in Canada a couple of years ago where the majority of the oats in the North American oat milk supply were coming from. And we did a lot of new products that were made with almond milk and were made, even some cases made with dairy milk. People were like, there is no oats to go around. Um, uh, and people ask a lot about, oh, like when is climate change and the ramifications of some of these geopolitical maneuverings going to start to affect us in like the food we eat? And the answer to that is like 10 years ago. Like it's been happening. We didn't have commercial scale raspberries for a while. There are now more and more freak meteorological events that are just increasing the more that we get into this climate change rabbit hole, that are typhoons that knock out vanilla plantations and cause the price of vanilla to increase by 1,000%. There's right now a global chocolate crisis where on one hand, your favorite chocolate bar is probably increasing in price bit by bit. On the other hand, there are conversations that we have every day where somebody says, I was going to do a chocolate chip flavor of this thing. Now maybe Snickerdoodle sounds more appealing because we don't have to deal with chocolate.
Yeah.
Um, that like it's happening, and it has been happening, and it's not it's tangible. It's not like a thing where you have to zoom out and we're not going to notice it in the moment. It's happening like right now in ways that affect our decisions on a daily basis.
Especially in CPG, like you said, because you have to buy a thing in a giant batch. It's not like, in a restaurant has an ability to buy like 1 day's worth of sunflower seeds, and say, well, that was fun, and then never go back to it again.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I think about like, the past 10, 15 years, I feel like Sichuan food in the United States really took off. Like it's always been here, but really took off as a popular thing. And I wonder like, what's the future of like Sichuan food in America if there's 125% tariff on Sichuan peppercorns, and things like that.
Yeah, it's a great question. Fortunately, spices have always been expensive per pound, but used in very small increments. So I think it's one of the most exciting, affordable luxuries we can have. But yeah.
Well, that's a really good point. We'll bring up with Ori later on with Burlap and Barrel. All right, so your degree was in what? I remember I first saw you before I met you at the CIA, and I think you were giving a lecture that was related to your thesis, which was about French fries,
mashed potatoes.
Mashed potatoes. Okay.
We also talked about French fries as like a case study of all of the nerdy ways you can make something that seems very simple and all the different effects you can get out of it. That one was that was a talk at the CIA. That was the number one, like it was the public speaking engagement I've done that has had the most like chef luminaries wander up to the like podium afterwards and be like, so let me ask you this thing about potatoes. There was something about it that was like a bug zapper, like just this like tractor beam bringing all of my heroes to like come ask questions. It was very cool. But yeah, my degree, I did my undergrad was in biochem, nothing to do with food. I was cooking on the side, and I was a cheesemonger and working at catering companies and restaurants and things like that. Then I went to grad school for food biochemistry. I discovered that field existed, and I studied in a fruits and vegetables lab, looking at potatoes and the way that the starch granules and cell walls and enzymes and stuff change when we cook them and make them into mashed potatoes. And the state of California paid for my degree to do that. It's just study science. They'll pay you in grad school. It's great.
I think I remember I read the book The Man Who Ate Everything by Jeffrey Steingarten way back in the day, and he has this whole insane exhaustive chapter about making mashed potatoes, and I mean that was kind of your thesis, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean not his research, but
no, I mean his thing, I think he had a deal where he would do like a low temperature enzyme step. There's an enzyme called pectin methylesterase, which will it does a bunch of stuff to cell walls, changes the texture of potato. It's really all that we need to know on that front. It was that. It was Joel Robuchon's pomme puree.
Which is still on the menu today. Like you go to his Vegas restaurant and that's it never leaves the menu, right?
Awesome. And remind me to come back to that, because that's a perfect context and people over technique kind of moment. But Yeah, I worked with some chefs at the French Laundry who were looking at an augmented version of uh, palm puree of the Robuchon method potatoes. I talked to Harold McGee, who was the godfather of this entire field of inquiry, or at least one of the early figureheads. And he was like, "Yeah, I've always had this question about like waxy potatoes versus floury potatoes, and what happens there." Um, and it just on and on. There were all of these people that had questions about how this stuff worked. I also had an ulterior motive where I still have a bone to pick with a lot of food science that so much of it is not applied. Like so much of food science is super reductive and super theoretical and so impractical for such a practically relevant field that when you get into food science and you choose your area of focus, it's a little bit like musical chairs, and you just want to. For me, I'll use I statements. I was incredibly motivated to try to like wedge myself my way into a project and a field of study that had anything to do with enjoying food. I didn't want to study like microencapsulating B vitamins to help them survive pasteurization. I didn't want to study uh, potential pathogen vectors that would impact the fresh baked bread industry. I didn't want to study uh, what happens to um, wheat when you mill it a certain way. Like I wanted to study something to do with cooking, and mashed potatoes were a great balance of being uh, standardizable enough where you could get like good data out of it, but also you had to cook. You had to eat mashed potatoes in order to make any of these conclusions.
But I think you're pointing out a really interesting thing that is why I've always loved talking and working with you guys at Pilot, is because you guys are part chef, part food scientist, and I'm going to use the term. I say the disclaimer that I hate the term, but it's convenient shorthand because everyone knows that it is, right? The molecular gastronomy movement, I think, really pissed off a lot of eaters, right? Because I think that because I think the idea of molecular astronomy almost tried to break down the barrier between chef and food scientist, meaning some of the practitioners says, if I can go deeper on understanding the science of food, I can create a more sensual, delicious experience, right? But that kind of implied that before that, there was this wall between being a food scientist and being a chef, right? And so I think that, you know, I don't know why should there be that way? Because I've met those. I'm not saying this is all food scientists, but I've certainly met food scientists where I don't know if they actually enjoy food. They just kind of see it as a chemical reaction, you
I'd say
know?
most.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, most food scientists are still more nerds who happen to study food and don't necessarily have passion for food.
Yeah.
Um, that's changing a little bit. I am still underwhelmed with the number of food scientists I meet who have enthusiasm for food, let alone their work. Um, just to touch on the molecular gastronomy thing, that's a perfect example where that actually wasn't. There was very little science going on. That was mostly aesthetic. There were a couple of places, um, the Fat Duck, El Bulli. I still honestly think that like early Noma should have gotten lumped into that. They were doing a bunch of similar lines of inquiry, but the aesthetic was different. Again, these like uh, early bastions of that whole moment in fine dining, they were bringing to bear incredible resources to look at a thing with the time to breathe and the time to scratch their chins, and they're thinking about like, how can we do awesome stuff with this?
Yeah.
Sometimes it had nothing to do with science. Like sometimes they were just like husking corn in a weird way and getting some result that nobody'd gotten
Yeah.
just because they had the time to like tinker with it.
Yeah.
And what happened as with what happens frequently is like that caught on and it started to become clearly a bankable aesthetic. And so then you had people doing El Bulli karaoke You had people doing fat duck pastiche. You had people doing, Noma stand-up impressions, and that's where I think things started to fail.
Yeah.
Because like
Yeah.
if you do an example, I came back. The most angry I've ever been in a restaurant was I was at a fine dining restaurant in Denver, and I was like just getting started on this road, and for me, going out to eat anywhere was a massive thing that like needed to be planned for and needed to be budgeted for, and inherent to that, there was a lot of buildup and a lot of expectation. This was like the one restaurant in Denver that was doing the flashy stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I went, and one of the dishes that they did was like shrimp cocktail, and there was liquid nitrogen involved.
Of course.
And it's really cool because liquid nitrogen is one of the things that has unlocked IQF shrimp on a commercial scale, so you can preserve the integrity of the meat and all these things. And
But also Dippin' Dots.
also Dippin' Dots, and there's a lot there. What happened at this restaurant was somebody was like, "Hey, liquid nitrogen, it'll make it smoky," and so somebody like brought out a like pretty cool looking shrimp cocktail in a martini glass, and then topped it off with liquid nitrogen. It was all smoky and did all this thing, and it completely froze it solid. Like it was exactly like you had uh, a bunch of IQS shrimp that you then let thaw, and then you then put back in your freezer, and it just like solidified into a block. And so there was this weird moment where I was early 20s with my mom, just like we're trying to go have like an awesome meal, and we're like, oh, this is weird. And so we waited a few minutes for it to thaw and like try to like hold it in our mouths and let the solid baby shrimp like melt like sorbet. It was a really weird. It was not a optimized experience. And then when the thing finally melted and we tasted it, it didn't taste good. Like it tasted like V8 or similar tomato vegetable mashup out of a can or a bottle on top of like some kind of unseasoned shrimp. And it was this thing where I think that when you take any aesthetic, any aesthetic, and a lot of people, I think this is a very useful way to talk about cultural appropriation as well. When you're doing a low effort, low thought shot at something,
Mm-hmm.
that's where it starts to get into problems with food, because you see a movie that's just like a ripoff of something and it's underwhelming or whatever. You're irked at the time you spent watching the movie and the amount of money you spent to get in. When you eat something that feels thoughtless and cynical, you've like welcomed it into your body. There's like a weird there's a weird like intimate ickiness that you get from it. And that's a long rant, but I think that it makes sense that we have strong emotional responses to food that we don't like.
Well, El Bulli karaoke is probably the funniest thing I've heard all week. That's hilarious, and you're right, because I think at the heart of it, and maybe that's why also that term molecular gastronomy is so kind of weird to me, because you're right. The movement was just more about people just having more time to think more critically about food and make smart decisions about what to do about a shrimp cocktail, versus the karaoke part is let's just put liquid nitrogen on it. It looks cool, but it doesn't add to the taste of it, right? Like that's the bastardization of it. Okay, so we've established your scientific chops. I have a curious question. Do you think there's a way to Is there a working unified theory of what makes food delicious, in that, like, I look at like books like, Samin Nosrat's book, Salt, Fat, Acid, Eat, right? Which kind of implies, it's not a universal formula, but it kind of implies that there is this kind of like chord progression that typically works within a cuisine, right? But
Mhm.
like, you look at umami. Why is umami seem to be not just Japanese or Asian cuisine, but it's fairly universal around a lot of cuisines. Like when you think about like, what are the foundation, like the first principles of flavor? Like, do you think there are any?
I think there are first principles. I think they are really foundational baseline stuff, and by no means a blueprint for deliciousness.
Sure. Okay.
I don't think we'll ever have that because of the human variable.
Well,
Um,
so probabilistically, is there a foundation of first principles that can usually make food more likely than not to be delicious than not?
yeah, and what's funny is every one I'm about to say, there is an immediate contradiction. So the things that we have at play, I think it comes. It for me, it always starts with the very basic uh, perception, the reception machinery that we have built into our bodies, and the fundamental ways our brains process information. And again, like it has to be that level of fundamentals because then from there, everybody is so diverse and unique that you can't really pin anything down. But general principles are we will get used to something that is the same if we're exposed to it for a long time. Adaptation is like a fairly universal thing that happens with our brain. An example I like to give a lot is like we can all see our own noses, and you're still able to play tennis and drive a car because your nose is always in the same spot in your visual field, and so it's easier for your brain to tune it out. It's like I got that. We're gonna dimmer switch that down and focus more on the stuff that's changing. It's like the T-Rex in Jurassic Park. It detects movement. We detect change. Um, so in general, uh, change is interesting to our brain.
Mm.
That is one of the first, I think, boxes that need to be checked for deliciousness is you need to be interested. Now, you can be interested in change and unsettled by it, or put off by it, or scared by it, or grossed out by it, but you at least need something to be stimulating and new in order to keep holding your attention. The other thing is we enjoy uh, variety, but to an extent. When you add, people like to talk about like a symphony of flavors and all of these things going on.
Yeah.
That's true, but like if you ask most people what a symphony sounds like, it's like whoever has the main line, the string section is playing the melody. And then if you're like, cool, now please just hum back to me who the second French horn was, like what line they were playing.
Yeah.
Or what was the low brass doing in general? And a lot of people are like, I don't know. It's just buzz, what's in the background.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of like a tricky thing with mixing stuff as well, is our brains do a thing called mixture suppression, where if you mix a bunch of stuff together, you can kind of mute everything and everything becomes muddled. And so it's one of those things where we like a lot of stuff going on. We like changes, we like contrast, but there's so many pitfalls where things can just get muddled and turn into a buzz and turn into this like indistinct roar.
Well, so
Um,
aren't you pointing to that's where the word acid in the book title comes in, right? Because so many people say like you've got some beef stew or something like that, and that is quite literally a muddling of a lot of good flavors. But that's where it's coming from when people say like, oh, add a little dash of sherry vinegar at the end, and that's the change. It cut through the mud, so to speak, right?
it can be, but you add a little sherry vinegar to a glass of already over sour lemonade, and it doesn't help your case. And I think salt, fat, acid, heat, like any of these like very catchy mnemonic devices that help people cook, the crux is that food is a bunch of switches, it's a bunch of dials and levers on a switchboard that you need to get comfortable tweaking to fit the moment,
Hmm.
to fit the dish, to fit how you're feeling, to fit the ingredients you have in front of you. There are different elements that contribute to this overall experience, and you need to have control over them in order to get to where you're trying to go. So I would say maybe that is the number one most overarching key or definition of deliciousness is all of these elements of what our food can tell us, texture and taste and aroma and all of the subcomponents of nuttiness and sourness and saltiness and cheesiness and etc. All of those things properly EQ'd for a given moment.
Uh-huh.
And that's where like a lot of chefs are like, time and place. That's a really fun like
Yeah.
buzzword, which is great. But time and place boils down to like, I want a hot bowl of chili when it's cold, and I probably want like chilled melon when it's hot. And if you are really nauseated, crispy lettuce is probably going to sound better than a grilled cheese. Unless for whatever reason, a grilled cheese is your ultimate safe place and you would have that in any context.
But still, the dynamic is I feel in danger. I need safety, and that safety could be grilled cheese or whatever, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. Deliciousness is when the right food meets you where you're at. And the way to get to that right food is complicated as hell, and you and I are complicated as hell. So deliciousness is really, really tough to crack, and it's one of the reasons why I just like always shake my head when it's usually like a New York Times op-ed once every like 7 years is like the golden palette that's shaping all of your food.
Oh,
this
like
person knows what they're doing. It's like the movie exec who's like the Midas touch that's responsible for 3 hit movies in a row, and let's not talk about the 4th one. Like there is no such thing because we are so unsolvable. We are so diverse. I think that's the only definition. Good food that meets you at the right moment of where you're at.
Yeah. You made a lot of references. Do you play music?
I do. I play drums.
You do? Okay.
I'm
All right.
in a room with a snare drum that is probably screwing up our audio fidelity.
Do you? It sounds fine. I didn't know that. So you referenced a lot of music to the symphony, the EQ. I've studied music my whole life too. Everything from clarinet to guitar to DJing, to singing. But like I frequently think about music when I think about how to make flavors come together.
Mm-hmm.
The bass, the mids, and the highs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I think there's a really strong analogy. Like, have you come across any other chefs that have like no musical background that still kind of use those analogies and think that way?
Man, all my best friends in the food world are drummers.
Really?
Oh yeah. Like so many of them, specifically drums. I don't know why that is, but yeah, I think. I mean, we've talked a lot about this techie notion of like, is ChatGPT gonna solve recipes and all these things? I think there are really brilliant, paradigm advancing ways to use technology in food. I think there are really stupid ways to do it too. And I think the same thing about music. Like I grew up being like arms crossed about drum machines and digital drum sounds. And because I was playing acoustic real drums and I was like, anything else is garbage. And fast forward to my like late 30s, and if something is just in the perfect pocket and just knocks, it doesn't matter. It's great. And the thing that I think is really comforting is the people who make amazing music where not a single note is played by like a traditionally acoustic means. All of those people just rip. Like all of those people have the ability to discern and curate what sounds are reaching your ears, whether or not they're making it by a means that was available in 1940 or not. And I think that about food a lot too. Like we can. I would love to go on a 3D printer rant, but as much as I think 3D printers are stupid and irrelevant for actual food, in the hands of a right chef, like they could probably make like a really awesome canapé with the aid of a 3D printer. And I think a lot of it ultimately comes down to critical thinking, and you have to have some virtuosity and some discernment in the choices you're making. We don't need to be Puritan about how, again, like aesthetically old school it is or not.
Case in point, Jay Dilla using the MPC and making it feel like it's human, right? So
just like there is not we, because I was not even DNA at that point, freaked out about Bob Dylan playing an electric guitar.
Yeah.
But music was okay after that. I think that food will continue to be okay and will continue to be more recognizable than we think, as long as people who know what they're doing are allowed to have license to curate your experience.
Well, that's a great segue to another person who knows what they're doing at what they're doing here. I want to welcome on our first guest here, Mario Ubiali, founder of Dymus. Mario, how are you?
Good. How about yourself? All good?
Welcome. I don't think you've met Ali, but here you guys are.
I have not. It's a great pleasure. I was really thrilled with what he was talking about, actually. So li-
Fantastic. Mario,
listening very intently.
Mario, for the listeners, where are you calling us from?
I'm connecting from my very house here in northern Italy. So in a very small country village located south of Brescia, where our headquarters are located.
Amazing. So let's get right into this because we've covered Ali and I have covered quite a bit. We've been talking about flavor, the foundations of flavor, perceptions of flavor. It's a perfect time to bring you in. Tell us just a quick few sentences about your company and what you do relation to flavor.
Absolutely. Uh, in a nutshell, what we do at a company is we're looking at flavor and the experience of food and the multisensorial experience of food through one very specific lens, which is what happens in the brain. And we have scaled and perfectioned an actual platform that is in fact capable of capturing millisecond by millisecond live the pre-conscious, the implicit processes that go on emotionally and cognitively in the frontal part of the brain. And we do that with a technology that is what, over 100 years old, which is the electroencephalogram technology, but it propels us into a different understanding. And I often say, Mike and Ali, it's a little bit like dig in. It's a little bit like you now have this like magical tool that allows you to look at the food experience of humans, not just from the surface of it, what they tell you, how they react, what their face looks like, or even their behavior in general. But it becomes this fantastic tool where it's almost like you're able to X-ray with the special satellites that archaeologists are using what's underneath that city, right? And so this is in a nutshell what we're trying to do around the world.
Okay. So on a practical level, maybe because I've gone through your process a little bit, I've been analyzed, so to speak. From the point of view of somebody being analyzed by your technology, what's that like?
I think from the point of view that, first of all, people kind of freak out in a good way. When we set out to do this, we were very afraid of reactions, first of all. So we were afraid that the experience would be a frightening, oh my gosh, the lie detecting machine has been applied to me and I can't think of the PIN code of my credit card because these people are reading thoughts. And I think you want to demystify this idea that you're able to capture anything even remotely connected with conscious thoughts. We're not connecting to thoughts. We're actually, on the contrary, looking for something different, which is that level of activity in the brain that is subconscious and emotional and cognitive and happens without me actually realizing. Then, having said that, to your question, the person coming from a panel test or sort of allowing us to work with them on a food experience, they essentially sit down in a fairly quiet location, doesn't need to be very clinical, doesn't need to be super isolated, and they wear this very portable wireless electroencephalogram with 4 frontal channels that we have developed. And subsequently, I have to say gladly, they sort of forget about it. I mean, they're excited about it, but the first thing you do, for example, you baseline them, right? So you ask them to be quiet for a minute, and they go through this baselining sequence where essentially we're capturing a little bit the humming of the motor, right? And then they go through the tasting.
But it's not invasive. It's just like a headband, more or less. That
First of all, it's not invasive, Mike, and I think it's a great opportunity to say not only it's not invasive. Do remember, it's essentially a set of microphones. I earlier on, Ali was talking about music. I was really thrilled to listen to him talking about the drums and all of that. Well, the brain plays its own music. right? It's going on all the time when we sleep, when we eat, when we do anything. What we do is we simply put sensors that are very tiny, super sensitive mic. They translate electroactivity that the brain naturally actually produces into something that we capture, digitize, and just stream to our software. But there is nothing going in. It's not a scanning technology. It's not X-rays. It's not one of those big machines you find in clinical settings. It's a set of mics.
Yeah. All right. So I've got this headset on now, and let's say, I don't know, we're doing cheese. You hand me a piece of cheese, then what?
First of all, you gotta be fairly accurate in how you're gonna be designing the tasting, right? So, I don't want to divert from your question. Let's stay on the practicalities. I just want to say the thing is you're tasting in the context of trying to discover something. Sometimes it's a very simple product question: is
Mm-hmm.
cheese A better than cheese B?
Mm-hmm.
So what matters and what needs to be explained is that our software allows to basically the person sitting for the cheese to find instructions on a touch screen, an iPad or something. So what happens is you have preset the timing of that experience for the person. So if you're tasting cheese, I would assume that it would be very interesting to, in fact, ask you to first look at it. So there's going to be an instruction on the screen, super simple in your language, wherever you are in the world, that is going to tell you, hey, now please do look at this. And it's nice because everything has been planned and timed out in advance. So now as a user, I relax, I get my instructions, I press my play button on the screen when I'm ready to go to the next level. And automatically the software does what? Timestamps that part of my experience. So essentially, I'm recording the sequence. And typically, Mike and Ali, the sequence of a tasting goes through the classic sensory aspects. So if it's just the tasting of the product, it's usually you look at it, you smell it, you put it in your mouth and chew and taste it, which again, depending on, I want to say product category, would take, for example, just one bite, multiple bites, spoonfuls, sips, whatever it is that you're bound to do, and then there's usually an aftertaste phase. And when you're done with those phases for one or multiple products, the software is going to ask you the classic questions because we also it matters. We mind about what people would actually say. Because again, like I said, it's not enough to just see what's underneath the big city of food experiences. It's very important, but it's one half of the story. The other half of the story is, in fact, what's on top. What do I see? What do people tell me?
So, right. So, okay. So your system is not just measuring when cheese hits tongue and the chemical. You're able to see some sort of reaction in the brain when I just look at a chunk of cheese, or I'm maybe, and I'm sure a lot of the commercial clients you have, I'll tell you a story about this cheese or something like that, right? So, yeah.
Yes,
It,
absolutely. Mike, the thing is, I was prior to this beautiful conversation, I not being a mother tongue English speaker, I said, Mike is asking me to talk about the future of flavor. I better look up in the Merriam-Webster dictionary what flavor actually means in English. And maybe it's going to mean something different to me as an Italian speaker, a Latin culture kind of person. And I looked it up, and Merriam-Webster says definition one is kind of the uh, effect that is elicited by certain properties resulting into taste. But then there is another element in the definition, and I'm loosely quoting, I didn't memorize, that says something like the entire experience of, that might be influenced by other factors rather than just the taste or the aroma of a food. So to your point, this is precisely the thing. The thing is, I feel that what we're doing with neuroscience is showing us that the experience of flavor, which we traditionally think it's a very biologically, physiologically driven thing that has to do with receptors. Okay, we've talked at length about umami is here and taste is, which is, by the way, all true. The beauty of neuroscience is like this creaking little door gets open and it's like in a thrilling movie. it squeaks on the hinges, and you discover that, oh my gosh, there's a set of other rooms here that we need to explore to understand why you, Mike, or Ali would have a completely different experience of that flavor, not necessarily depending on the intrinsic properties of the actual food you're. I've had people tasting dark chocolate in 6 different European countries, and I tested them with my technology. Same producer, same batch. You could say physically equal, identical. Well, did they have the same experience of the flavor of that product? No, they didn't. So the context, the culture, I don't want to go down to a rabbit hole. I want to mention is people listening to this, go look up advancements in epigenetic studies. Turns out that what my grandmother and grandfather used to eat in their daily diet is actually passed down to my sensorial sensitivity and my bandwidth in perceiving hotness or spiciness or bitterness. The old stereotype of, oh, Mexicans can take a lot of spiciness or hotness. It's a stereotype, but it's based on the recent discoveries on not DNA, but RNA resident into tissues and specialized parts of our body, being influenced by the habits and the exposure of people who preceded us in our genetic line. So flavor is so much more than just the intrinsic first definition of Merriam-Webster.
That's fascinating to know that there's some scientific mechanism behind that cultural affiliation. I mean, is it also a little bit of nature versus nurture? Like, could you raise a certain person who loves spice
I
in a
was going to say
place
the
where
same
there's
thing.
no spicy food? And
Yeah.
Yes, because you see, the beautiful, complicated thing about the human brain and the human in general is plasticity. So there's a set of given conditions, nature, and then there's a set of evolutionary traits, which is nurture. So absolutely, yes, of course. I'll give you an example that is very personal to me. I have a 15-year-old son. We adopted him when he was 2.5 years old in a remote region beyond the Ural Mountains in Siberia. So for sure, you could tell the guy doesn't have my genes. Good for him, by the way, because he's like 6'2" already, and I'm like as short as a cork. But
wow,
the thing is, you know, is there an influence because he has been eating for 13 years a certain Mediterranean diet in our household? Of course there is. So absolutely, the point is that differentiation in populations can be plastically adapted or changed or nudged into a certain direction. However, so far, the only thing we have observed, guys, and I'm sorry to report this, I'm pretty sure people so experienced with food like you already know that, is that after the Green Revolution in the 50s and 60s of last century, as a matter of fact, what's happening is that the great common consumption of certain massified products in the market has in fact restricted the general bandwidth of sensorial response to food because of a result of this huge homogenization of the proposal on the shelves, right? And so to me, that's kind of, again, proof of that plasticity and the nurture in a sort of negative sense, as far as I'm concerned.
wait. So, I mean, that's a fascinating point I want to touch on. But this idea that like the rise of industrially produced food has sort of dulled flavor in a minute, right? I don't know, Ali, Mario, like what's your take on that?
Yeah. I mean, also, hi, Mario. Nice to meet you.
Hi, Ellie.
I love you already. I think that uh, a common through line that I always think about with food is where people talk about, do ingredients matter? Do our genetics matter? Does the lighting in the room matter? Does what you had for the previous meal matter? Does your age or your physical state or all of these things matter? And the answer is yes. And the answer is yes to all of it, probably more than to even things we can detect right now. And so Mike kicked things off a little bit. We're always talking about like AI and technology and things like that. I have always been a tech culture skeptic. when it comes to food. Just the
Mhm.
culture of, especially in the United States, like the Silicon Valley
Don't get
nerds
me
need to
started.
stay out of that. But
Ali, I have a long line of enemies stretching around the block. Don't get me
yeah,
started
yeah.
on that.
Well, but uh, all of these tools are giving us the ability that if in the right hands with people who are thoughtfully asking interesting questions, we can learn new things. And one of the things I've always said, you give the analogy of like opening a door. I I I did a talk years ago about how flavor has the power, flavor as defined as our response to stuff that we are being stimulated by, has the ability to tell us a lot about ourselves. And this was in like 2015. I was like, imagine some far off world where we can like study these massive data sets and see what they could tell us. We're getting there. And I have a friend from grad school, Megan Fisk-Clements, who's like this brilliant food scientist who's gotten a lot into nutrition. She's worked at a lot of startups that have been studying metabolomics and how they interact with food. And she's saying like we're looking at your body, which is unknowably complex, the composition of a piece of celery, which is a moving target and also unknowably complex, all of the neurological machinations of what happens when you eat it, all of the metabolic things that happens after you eat it, and all of this stuff together. She was like, the 30 years ago, we didn't have the data crunching power to make sense of any one of those things individually, much less all of them getting rammed together. And I think the coolest technological hallmark about the era that we're living in is we have just opened the door, and for the first time we've ever had the power to start like sorting through all the rubbish that was in that room. And we're now just starting to be able to make sense of all of the chaos of these problems of data sets that were so messy that they were beyond they were not human problems. They would outstrip the ability of every grad student in the world working around the clock on a single problem to solve it. We now have a pathway to at least start answering some of those, or start extracting answers from some of those problems. But I also think that like that is, we are just learning to say like 3 words in a language so that we know where the bathroom is and we know how to order water. Food is this like we are very far from technology allowing us to like compose poetry with
Yeah.
what's going on in our minds and bodies.
If I may, I want to kind of piggyback on that very last sentence or word that you use, which is poetry. I love the analogy. By the way, I also love you, so there's a bromance starting here. But the thing is this, Ali. I think you touched on so many smart things. There's so much to say, but I want to start from the poetry bit, because the one thing that really scares me about the general discourse on technology and food in Silicon Valley might be an example, but I wouldn't want to say it's confined to that, is sort of this idea that I've debated in the world of AI recently. I was lucky enough to participate into a research that was later published, resulted in a paper on Nature towards the end of last year. For some crazy reason, I was in the list of authors. I think I just was making the coffee for the others, but doesn't matter. But the point is, we were talking about how AI is going to influence the thought structure of humans, right? So if we transfer that thought and question to how is AI going to impact our general understanding and relationship with food, to me, I want to continuously take the word you use, poetry, and bring it back to the center of the equation. To me, there's an element. We are currently running a huge risk, and that's the risk of thinking, oh, look at all this amazing computational power, all this amazing AI, blah blah blah, and then you run this fantastic shiny machine. What is finality? Finality in the sense of what is the meaning of why are we doing this? And I always talk about poetry because there's a beautiful sentence in one of my favorite philosophers from Heidegger, a very very heavy, very boring German philosopher from the 20th century. And at one point in his career, one of these major thinkers in the whole history of philosophy in the West, he says, guys, I've come to a conclusion. the only truthful way of thinking is poetry. I think we live in an age in which our overcomplication of food and the relationship with food is alienating us further from the fact that food is one of the two direct channels. I always use this imagery at conferences and they never invite me back, by the way. There's two ways humans have been biologically integral to nature around them and to ecosystems: sex and food. After the pandemic, sex became like it was completely dissipated, vanished, technologized, and digitized, and destroyed, and clothed in fear and in this idea that other people's skins are bringing germs and bacteria, right? So that was removed from our social life and made into a product. Food, that's the other channel by which we interact with each other and with nature. By the green revolution, by the new fascination with AI, runs the risk of becoming the subject of an obsession that is about, let's do this because we can do it. As a humanist philosophy graduate from the Mediterranean area in the world, my approach to neuroscience and to the science of what we bring to the table is constantly that of reminding people that we have a prerogative versus AI. AI inhabits digital machines, which, guess what it means? They don't have an existential problem. When they ask me, oh, what do you think is the big difference that makes humans special? Ultimately, that like I think it was the leader of the band called The Doors who said nobody's gonna get out of here alive. So humans have an existential problem, and so everything they do is their way of culturally giving meaning to everything that happens to them. Food doesn't escape that equation. What I'm worried about is that we live in an age in which, for example, people don't cook, which is a great, meaningful act of putting meaning to an ingredient and knowing where it's coming from. So I am not a ludist. I utilize technology. I actually sell technology-based solutions. I trust science. I love complexity. I know that we need to understand. I completely trust you. As a matter of fact, I just want to take your piece of that beautiful contribution and say, my only segue to that is that let's make sure that whatever we're going to use, AI, whatever, can we compose poetry? Because that's what I loved about what you said. That's what I caught. Can we make poetry in food? I'd be interested in that.
So you talked about kind of assigning meaning to food, and Mario, you quite literally studied that. Have you ever kind of seen an instance where someone tastes a food and objectively speaking, they're just not enjoying it? But have you ever seen an instance where meaning can overcome their physical perception of a food?
Yes, we have many times in mostly in social rituals, right? So in settings where the food is completely enclosed and wrapped in meaning, not because of the food itself, but because of the act of actually having it. The most politically incorrect example that I can tell you culturally, for example, is when I was growing up in Italy, kids around 5 or 6 at a big feast, sitting with the rest of the family at a big table. Imagine after the Christmas lunch, after the Easter lunch, on a regular Sunday with your grandma, were literally forced to taste wine. And you would have to drink some wine from your father's glass, because that was a rite of passage. It was a way of for the family to say, come on, you're now at the table. This is how growing up is. And I know that it's maybe a far away removed example, but we go into more scientifically based studies. We have extensively looked at rituals in different anthropological dimensions of life, where either in rather less structured, maybe groups of people and human cultures, or even in very advanced ones, the actual context socially of consuming food is putting extra value that goes completely beyond the sensorial aspect of that. And socially, I think there are many examples, even in the West, where people would eat something that they don't like just because it's the thing to do at the proper time.
I was going to say exactly that. The perfect example that I can think of is functional health food. This is something in the past 5 years, I can think of like 3 or 4 separate projects where we've had a tasting with somebody who's looking to create a product.
Mm-hmm.
And the feedback has been, I think this tastes a little too good. Can we make it more bitter? Can we throw the ginger out of balance on purpose? Can we overload on ginger so that this aggressively gets into your nose and makes an unpleasant sensory experience in order to better earn trust that it's working?
Yep.
And I honestly think that like performative nutrition is like one of our most interesting modern rituals that we've come up with,
Yes.
of like the gut shot, the green juice, the whatever it is. There is this like, it usually is like astringent, bitter, aggressive phytochemicals. The flavor of that, I think, is like weirdly one of our most like culty, like modern Western food practices.
I love this. I want to add another hour onto this conversation for that, because like, well, I mean, like you said, the ginger thing, right? Like those ginger shots that boost your immunity. Well, the one problem with a thing that boosts your immunity is, let's give them benefit of the doubt and say it does boost your immunity. Can you feel your immunity being boosted? Not really.
No.
Not immediately. So that's why they have the ginger in it, to say like, holy mother of God,
But
something's happening.
it's also, I think, exactly of that scene early on in Indiana Jones where I think the character's name is Marion, is just going shot for shot with this like gigantic, I think, Siberian dude. And there's this thing when you're a kid and you see somebody like theatrically drink hard liquor and they go, ah, like there is something there about like, I have long thought alcohol doesn't actually taste good. Like I don't think that.
May I say that I have a similar theory for coffee?
I love this theory. I say this
Okay,
all the time.
go.
Guys, there's been places in San Francisco in 2019 that I was like, is this a sadistic, subtle way of trying to scare me out of the idea of drinking more coffee? And there was this very long, elaborated ritual, which, by the way, in Italian that goes into an espresso bar. It's called espresso because it means fast. You drink it in one shot at the bar, standing. If you go 8:05, this morning I was in Milan for a business meeting. I went into a bar, typical Milanese morning, like 2,000 people at the long bars, all standing, coming in, still dressed, not taking off their jackets, going there and say, one espresso, one macchiato, one this, one that. And when I was in San Francisco, with the classic, stereotypical hipster guy with the checker shirt and the funny mustache and the little beanie, and who's taking like 27 minutes, and you're like, as an Italian, I was like, this is going to be the Sistine Chapel of coffee. I mean, this thing is going to be like, my gosh. And it was, to me, it was way off. It was tremendously acidic, completely not within the range of pleasurability. But to me, I looked around me and I thought, am I the only one? Or is this being that case that you just described, Ali? Is this the case where everybody's like, oh, no, this is the way it's supposed to be, you can't enjoy it.
I have so many thoughts on this. In general, coffee, whether good or bad, to your taste or not, is the flavor version of watching a horror movie, where the point is for it to be just short of intolerable so that you get something out of it. And that
Absolutely.
I like, this is completely a hot take and unfounded by any science. I really do think that a lot of our enjoyment of things like coffee and strong spirits is the thrill of survival when you're done and you're just
if I
left
may,
with aftertaste.
If I may, I want to go back to being less humanistic and more scientific. However, we got to remember we're making two examples that are extremely, I want to say, bioreactive on the brain, on the neurophysiology. So
For sure.
in those two cases, in coffee is coffee. We all know that the truth is, boom, you have that kick, whatever the kick means for you, but you have that kick, and that kick is the reward mechanism that cements in your brain. Over and over again, what we're measuring with food is that, to your point about why would people go back to certain functional nutrition, or Mike was saying, do they really feel that their immune system is being boosted? They don't, to be fair, of course. But the thing is, if at any given point in time, the brain cements a connection between a set of sensorial stimuli, the recipe of the coffee, whatever, the coffee, the ginger, our examples, the alcohol, and an ensuing, immediate, slightly delayed, but generally associated, implicitly associated effect on my reactiveness if I'm drinking coffee, relaxedness if I'm drinking alcohol, or looseness, or whatever you want to call it if I'm drinking alcohol, then what happens is repeated consumption, because of the neuroplasticity of the whole experience, cements this memory. That is this very complex network of, okay, I know what this is going to do to me. When we did a study, a fantastic, interesting study on indulgence in sweet snacks, we discovered that whatever was qualified as indulgence for the group we were studying, and at one particular point it was Nutella for Italians, guess what? And we discovered that because Nutella becomes the staple of indulgence for a group that consumes that product regularly as a way of having that comforting hedonic experience, the actual brain mechanism of the Nutella interaction gives you a sense of indulgence and pleasurability long before the actual product is in your mouth. It works when you are even imagining to have it. And then when you look at the little jar, and when you unscrew the top, when you smell it, that's the interesting thing about the future of flavor, is understanding, can we explore this sort of aura of dematerialized elements that make the experience of flavor something that becomes a behavior?
I think the coffee thing I think about a lot, in that I don't understand why anybody drinks decaffeinated coffee. Because it's but it also makes me think, I remember when I was a child and I tasted some of my dad's coffee and I thought it was absolutely disgusting, but I have loved coffee for most of my life after that. And I gotta say, and maybe there's never an answer to this. I don't know if it's that I truly inherently love the taste of coffee, or if the taste of coffee has been a Pavlovian response to knowing that I will get a little boost to energy and it's morning, which means new day, new promise and stuff like that. At this point, you can't separate the two, I don't think.
I think the answer is always just yes to all of it. All of it is true. Mario, I have an admission. When you were describing this experience of just an insufferable hipster taking forever to make your coffee, and then it was super sour and all of that, you described my platonic ideal coffee experience.
Wow.
Everything that you hated about that, to me, I walk in, I see that person behind the bar, and it takes that long. This is something I would love your insight on, from when you're going around and measuring the feedback of people in different populations and different times. I'm so fascinated by coffee, things like barbecue in the southern United States, things like bread baking in the United States. These are very, very ancient, simple in terms of the number of ingredients, food and beverage rituals that are prone to going through these, beer's another one, prone to going through these really crazy upheavals. There's like a changing of the guard. And Mike and I have actually worked on coffee projects in the past together. We talk about the waves of coffee, the first wave versus second wave versus third wave coffee. I am so loyal to my love of third wave coffee that anything that is remotely close to what would have been considered appropriately medium roasted in 1997 to me tastes like a burnt ashtray.
Right.
And
Right.
I don't deny that people drank early Starbucks, Pete's, etc., that era of Seattle coffee. And honestly, what I would expect was served in espresso shops in Italy for a long time, darker roasted coffee.
It still is.
And
Still
still is.
yeah, absolutely.
It was so funny. I spent my honeymoon was in Budapest, Vienna, and Prague, and my wife and I spent the entire time going into the beautiful like Viennese opera coffee houses, looking at the wonderful architecture, marveling at the people in their elegant coats and outerwear, and then going across the street to the hipster place with Edison bulbs to get the actual coffee because we wanted the third wave stuff. But anyway, my question for you is, like when we go through these changing of the guards, and it's not a complete changing of the guard because there's you and there's me existing at the same time in the world, but like to me, everything that is associated with darker roast, old school coffee is something that I avoid, and I will only drink if I'm like stuck at a conference and all they have is that. For you, everything about this third wave style, especially the sourness, like let's just talk about simply that. I have acquired such a strong affinity and love of sour coffee that it is like hard for me to grasp hating sourness and relishing in the darker roast character. Like, is that something that we are just maybe going to do forever? Is flip back and forth depending on what we like, or is there like a pinnacle of evolution where we just settle on something and flatline?
I don't think we're ever going to settle on anything. My honest answer to that is that, and I think you beautifully said it before, it's the point is, it's always yes to all of the elements in the question, so to speak, to just quote you earlier on in the conversation, meaning, why do I have such a repulsion for the features in coffee that actually make it so attractive to you and vice versa? Is because we could broadly, let's just use loose terms and hopefully not offensive to anyone, but broadly saying, we could say, well, it's because we belong to different cultural groups. Whatever you want to use as a definition, we can go on for another 3 hours about what is the definition of a cultural group, what is culture. But let's just try to at least keep for our listeners to a level that is at least sparking some interest and thought. To me, the point is, we will never reach a common pinnacle unless there is a set of very almost violent, I want to say, factors that are going to compress the diversity of humans, their belonging to different cultures and aspirations and system of values into only one. I hate to go back to that. Maybe the late hour is inspiring me to be more Marxist than I usually am during the day. But, I often say, everybody hates to have that conversation, but I do believe, why are we throwing away the element of the capitalistic market-driven way of looking at food is undeniably an element that, in my opinion, is constraining that diversity that you and I are talking about just now. So my answer to you is that I hope to God not that we will not get to an age in which everyone will want the same product with the same features. Because if we get to that unfortunate time in history, to me, that's the end of diversity in its most beautiful sense, which is the sense of the freedom, the creativity, the actual emotional element of social creativity in being able to self-determine that it's totally okay if I like rotten fish on Christmas Eve, like my friends in Sweden, and for God's sake, I cannot force myself to even get close to the actual place when they're cooking it, and vice versa. And there are so many apparently funny jokes about it. Ali and Mike, the classic joke about what is cooked pasta al dente for an Italian is probably pasta out of the actual carton or bag before boiling for Americans. It's one of the many stereotypes, right? And so forth. And to the point that one of the most famous pizzaiolis in Naples usually says, I don't have anything against American pizza or any pizza outside of Naples. The thing is, and he says it very bluntly, it's not pizza. And in a way, you want to despise that kind of conflict between different cultures, and mine is better than yours. I also don't like it. I travel, I eat everything, but I wouldn't also want to say, oh, at one point we'll always like the same things. Oh my gosh, God forbid.
Well, it's maybe it's the way you two are. No one can see this except me, but you two are positioned on either side of me in my screen windows, and I was wondering in the coffee thing, like Mario, if you were born in 2010 and you were born and raised in the Mission in San Francisco, and Ali, you were born and raised in 2010 in Milan, Italy, you guys would probably swap preferences. I mean, I don't see how that couldn't be. Like, how would you, growing up in Milan in 2010 onward, become affinity to sour, acidic coffee and vice versa, right?
Absolutely.
But you can
Totally.
also trace it back to isn't the culture and the geography responsible for so much of it? Because again, that pizza argument, right? People in the United States love to make fun of Chicago style pizza, saying that's not pizza, right? And there's people in Chicago that are like, no, it is pizza, right? And I don't know. I feel like all of this is just so much just down to just random chance of where you grew up with. And it's part of almost your tribe, right? People in Philadelphia, their preference of cheesesteak places is bordering on religion. And that's not the only place that kind of thing happens. So, I don't know. Isn't this all to a certain extent nurture, not nature?
Yes and no. Yes and no. My belief is this. We've done, for example, studies on disgust. Okay.
Mhm.
So what is perceived as being disgusting? And you could argue, yes, there is a range. So again, to your point, there could be a range where, or my point, rotten feet, fairly disgusting to me. I actually was forced to have it, otherwise it would be unpolite, but that's because I'm a gentleman. But the thing is, when you look at psychometric scales of disgust, they're universally recognized as actually being valid across different cultures. It's just that out of a certain moving range, you might have a certain population that is within the range, but a little moved to one side or to the other. But still, there are those extremes that are very common to every human. So to me, again, let us not forget the objective aspects of the food and the properties of the food and the sensorial apparatus and how we experience through actual cells in our body and sensors on our system. So let's not forget that. However, to your point, Mike, again, the tribe thing, the belonging thing. My reading of this is uh, I am fascinated by studying that diversity because ultimately what that tells me is I don't want to make it an agonist of something, but I like the idea that this is a study that shows us that humans are perfectly okay if they want to belong to a tribe in a good sense. Why? Because it's the resulting action of somebody that is trying to give meaning to this unknown little universe that we spend a very short time in, and then who God knows where we go, right? So to me, there's an element of do I need to really see the perfect harmony of the system? Maybe I don't, and maybe again, maybe this is the guy from Italy who understands the movie La Grande Bellezza, and the rest of the world is telling me, what do you see in that movie? It doesn't make sense. It's the story of how Italy has grown into a culture where it's like the beauty of the existing harmony of chaos. I'm fine with it. And I would like people to be fine with that in food by accepting this diversity and gradient of diversity. And I hope that using neuroscience is going to teach us this story of the two ways you can look at it is you need meaning, you need to belong, you want to have relations, you want to have meaning. But guess what? The great news is your brain is plastic. It's dynamic. So also do not close yourself. It's totally fine. You can also try something else. You can educate yourself to a different lifestyle. And this is the key to the future of flavor to me. Future of flavor needs to be, if we understand it, that little tiny gate we gotta really catch and get through if we want to drag the entire population of the world towards something that is sustainable. Because that's the other big topic right now.
Mario, Okay, I want to keep this going. We're going to have Ori Zohar come in just 1 second. But Mari, I know it's late over there, but you are welcome to stay on for the rest of the conversation, and we could just have this be a four-way dinner conversation. But if you have to go, you can politely just say bye and then click off whenever
It's
you want.
how can I go? It's what are you talking about, man?
All right, perfect.
I don't get to have these conversations all the time with everyone.
Oh, well, here we are. And I want to welcome our next guest on to here, Ori Zohar. How are you, my friend? Ori, can you hear us? Okay, we'll give him a second. Ori, where are you? Okay. Mario, maybe while Ori is coming on, I asked Ali this question earlier. I want to ask you this. I asked, do you think there are any kind of first principles or unified theories on how to make food delicious?
I wish I had heard what Ali had to say about it, so that I could sort of kind of copycat that smartness. Um, I want to say my universal rule based on the kind of work that we do in neuroscience and sensory neuroscience is this, and it kind of really connects to what we've been discussed in the last 45 minutes, and that is my rule of thumb that is really universal is to try to understand whom are we making this food to be delicious for. And so to me, it's understanding about it's the understanding of who are these people that we're making this food and what is deliciousness. It's a general concept that has a lot to do with the debate about what is beauty, right? So again, I'm a philosophy kind of major. So if you look at aesthetics in philosophy, this is this never-ending debate about is there any such thing as universal beauty? And except, of course, from Mike when he looks at himself in the mirror, I don't think there is. And in the end, I think deliciousness is universal in the sense of what kind of quality of emotion that brings along when it happens. But as we discussed in the last 45 minutes, I believe it's more about. I think I would want to say rule of thumb is there is no deliciousness without emotion. It's not just pleasure. To me, it's emotion because when I say emotion, I mean meaning. And it doesn't matter. When I say meaning, I don't mean the noble sense of meaning. I just mean that it has some place in your life, right? So deliciousness for me is emotion because emotion drags along the fact that for you that food has some sort of attachment and meaning.
Super well said. That's a good segue to Ori. Ori, can you hear us? Hello.
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you for having me.
Hi, welcome on. It's good to see you here. I think you know Ali. I heard you guys met up earlier. And also Mario Ubiali from Italy, from Dymas, is on the call here. Maybe building off of what we've just been talking about, because you're joining us kind of a couple hours into a longer conversation about flavor. But Ori, by way of kind of introduce a little bit about you and Burlap and Barrel, but maybe bake into that, what is your definition of deliciousness?
Yeah, thanks for having me. For a few hours in, everyone can stretch out, loosen your shoulders. It's good to join y'all. But my name is Ori Zohar. I'm the co-founder and co-CEO of Burlap and Barrel. We're a single origin spice company, meaning that we're bringing the same values that people know and love for single origin coffee, tea, chocolate, while we go to farmers markets. We're just bringing that to spices in this kind of comprehensive way, working directly with smallholder farmers around the world, paying them a lot more, but also we have this really clean and clear chain of custody going all the way back to the farmer. So you get these like expert farmers, and we're getting the spices directly from them, where they make more money, and we get really, really fresh, high quality spices. For me, deliciousness is we think a lot about flavor in this line of work. And we're finding like deliciousness is about like kind of there's like a chemical potency, of all the stuff we talk about, essential oils and all kinds of that of intensity of flavor. But it's also funny to see that kind of juxtaposed against memory. And like it's so hard to they say it's so hard to like beat like your grandma's recipe of cooking because that's the thing that was ingrained in you when you were a young child. That was what you were brought into the earth with. So like a lot of this we find that oftentimes people have really strong and emotional reactions when one of our spices kind of triggers one of those memories, and the memories are so strongly transmitted through this deliciousness, through flavor and smell, and then add memory onto that, and all of a sudden you're able to transport people to back to their childhood. And so for me, deliciousness is all about these like deeply and emotionally resonant kind of experiences that were brought in through your tongue and through your nose. And that to me opens into the world of deliciousness.
So I think all of us have been huge fans of burlap and barrel for so long. I when people ask me what burlap and barrel is, I frequently tell them, like, do you remember the first time you ever had an heirloom tomato and then you realized all the other tomatoes are kind of garbage? That's what burlap and barrel does with every single spice. I just reordered a big batch of stuff a week ago, just anticipation of knowing to have this conversation with
Oh my
you.
God.
And I honestly, all your spices are awesome, but one of my favorite ones is just, I think maybe one of your popular ones, the Zanzibar black peppercorns, for the sole reason that for most of my life, I think I was gaslit into believing what black pepper should taste like. I
Yeah,
thought
yeah,
I thought the
totally.
theoretical limit of taste was here. And then I think it was meeting either you or Ethan at a trade show one day in Brooklyn, and then I had that one, and it was like boom, like here. I talk a little bit about, like, what is it about the way that you guys are going about getting your spices that gives it that holy shit factor versus just the regular sawdust I've been buying pre discovering burlap and barrel?
Oh yeah, and totally. And like that's one of our criteria, by the way, for like sourcing spices is like with the second you open that jar, the second you smell it, the second you taste it, you have to instantly recognize that this is something that's of a different quality. And it's because people are so used to buying spices at the grocery store out of these kind of dusty old, shelves and all that. And often we tell people just like the best days of your spices were behind them even before you open that jar from the grocery store. And one of our aha moments for this business was working with chefs who like knew their cattle rancher and their butcher and their produce farmer, but yet the whole spice aisle was still a totally kind of blank slate. It was just you just get these things from where they come from. They have no origin, no further questions. And so what we had realized is this really started where the like original business idea came from Ethan, my business partner and co-founder in this business, where he was working as an aid worker in Afghanistan. He had gotten his master's in international development. He'd worked as a chef in New York before that. But in his work, he was in all parts of Afghanistan, especially the mountains in the north, and was bringing back all kinds of stuff. Like all people who love food do, is you stuff your suitcase full of all the things that you loved on that trip. And he brought back this wild cumin from the hills of Badakhshan in the north, and his chef friends were like, "Oh my God, I've never had anything like this." And we do talk about it in the same way, where it's about this, like the same way you go to a farmer's market and you have that apple that was picked that morning versus the apple in your grocery store. It's been in cold storage for 6 to 12 months. It elicits this emotional reaction and this intensity of flavor. And so we kind of built our business around that moment where we work directly with these smallholder and specialty farmers. And normally farmers sell into this like big kind of commodity industry where a farmer sells somebody who's drying, who's buying from hundreds of farmers. That person who's drying is selling to somebody who's grinding, who's buying from dozens of people that are drying, right? And so forth and so on. And even I went to one of the big grocery stores that I won't name, and I saw a country of origin on their peppercorns was 5 countries. And that just seemed totally silly. So basically, you have to start with really good farmers that are doing something that's way different than the average, and they need to not let it get into this commodity system. And so we work with the farmers to not only grow the spices, but dry, clean, grind when necessary, and export. And that way we have this chain of custody. Good and bad isn't mixed together. It's all based on that farmer. And the farmer makes a lot more money where intermediaries would make all that money. And so instead the farmer makes more money, has a lot more agency over what they grow and how they grow. And in particular, the Zanzibar black peppercorns. Zanzibar, the soil is too sandy. It's too windy over there. It's not the right environment for peppercorns, but you get these really small and intense peppercorns. If you know about the wine industry, you don't want too much rain. If you know about so many other things, so you get these really intense, wonderful peppercorns, and all of a sudden you taste it and it kind of opens your eyes into what this spice could really taste like, where everything else becomes a shadow of what this thing actually is.
So have you effectively cut out all, if not most of all the middlemen? Like you have like handshake relationships with all the people that are physically growing these spices?
Yeah, that's right. In some cases, there are some folks that work with farmers to help. So, like in Vietnam, we work with a social enterprise that mostly works with female farmers, but they've done stuff like paving roads. They've done stuff like running electricity. they have a little spice nursery in there. So in some cases, we do work with like local social enterprise that help with some of the logistics of all of it, but they're still keeping this direct line back to the farm. And so not every single farmer is this like, entrepreneur that's able to build this whole vertically integrated supply chain themselves. We help with it as much as possible, but in some cases we also have some other folks that are doing, or farmers that bound together into a cooperative like they do in Zanzibar, where they have, again, they built a nursery, they bought a grinder, the cooperative, so the individual farmers couldn't afford that. But this is miles of a different model from anything that's existed in spices. But we were able to kind of borrow some of the models that have happened for 20 plus years in coffee and tea and chocolate and all of that. So this isn't a totally new idea in the world, but because spices are so varied and saffron is a totally different spice and way of growing in region of the world than cumin, than cinnamon, which is tree bark, than peppercorns, which are the fruit of a climbing vine. Like, I think that was the hurdle up until now to really building this global spice company, is that you have to deal with so many origins and styles of farming and post-harvest processes and all of that. And we've just one at a time kind of built those into our network and added them.
So I think one of the funniest things that I think about a lot is the fact that, like, you go back to the 1600s, right? And people literally fought and killed each other for nutmeg. And it's maybe darkly hilarious to me that I could just like walk into a Walmart and get some dusted nutmeg like for less than $1 today. And just thinking about like, how the hell do we get from there to here? But like, more importantly, if I want to get your point of view on like considering where we are now in the state of the spice world, what does it look like the next few hundred years?
Yeah, totally. Well, I
What's
have
going
to
to
tell
seem
you,
hilarious that we do today to people 50, 100 years, even 10 years from now?
like the spice world even now still operates in a lot of the ways that it did hundreds of years ago, in terms of like there's absolutely no transparency. You don't know where this comes from, and there's power in like the lack of transparency, because you can put whatever origin of whatever thing you want in there. You can have huge warehouses and stockpiles for good years and bad years. But what we're really seeing now and we're pushing is people to consider spices as an agricultural product that has harvest, that has seasonality, that is fresh. And so that's what we're really kind of looking into, this next evolution of the spice industry. But it feels like it's been a couple hundred years coming. I mean, you're talking about like the Dutch East India Company going in, and Manhattan being traded for the nutmeg growing islands. And like, it's such a crazy and wild history. And so we're seeing that starting to happen now, for people to care about, what kind of cinnamon is this? Wait, where did these peppercorns come from? Those are, and people are kind of extending the same values that they do at their cheesemonger or farmer's market or how they buy wine. They're extending those same values into the world of spices. I'm seeing also we're at a funny moment in America specifically, where it kind of feels like we're at war with the world, and spices don't grow domestically. They love these tropical and subtropical things. So I think in a few hundred years we might see spices growing a little bit more in controlled environments, because like we're seeing like the cinnamon comes from 15-year-old trees that like parents will often plant that their children end up harvesting, and there's still so much relying on nature being in this. Like, it's still an agricultural product, and so many spices are grown wild or in these kind of like agroforestry environments. I think that as the environment of the world gets more unpredictable, we're seeing harvest change and rainfall change and all of that. I think that maybe in a couple hundred years we will also find some controlled way to grow and produce spices, so they're in their ideal environment and they're able to grow over time. We're seeing a ton of resiliency with chilies and all that. So chili peppers, from bell peppers to all the way to the
Yeah.
super hots, all kind of came from one single origin, and it is not where they're known for. Spanish paprika came over with kind of like the Columbus era, and then that made it up into Hungarian paprika. But chilies are native to kind of Central and some of South America, but they adapt so well. So my point is, I think two things. Maybe there'll be some bigger controlled environments in how we can grow spices, because right now the idea of repatriating spice supply chains is laughably impossible. Like, there is no domestic source for black pepper or cinnamon or saffron or vanilla. Even though some folks are able to grow them in small quantities, but maybe we'll find a way to kind of tame some of the agricultural kind of style of spice growing. But they also grow really beautifully in these agroforestry environments. So when you go to Zanzibar, you see vanilla vines climbing up cinnamon trees that are, right next to these, like under the shade of these clove trees and all of that. And so like I hope that as we kind of develop this like more kind of permaculture, agroforestry approach to agriculture in general, that we'll start seeing spices be included in some of that, because it's really hard to justify building any infrastructure around low value crops.
Yeah.
But spices are these really high value crops. And so I think that that's a good opportunity to build something there.
Ori, the question for you, but I'd love to hear from Ali and Mario on this. Is we spent a little bit of time talking before about how the place where you grew up kind of affects how your palate chases. Mario was telling us about he's in Italy, of course, so you can expect what his ideal coffee experience looks like. Ali was eschewing the wonders of high acid coffee from the third wave and things like that. And for me, I frequently think of stuff like ketchup. I love good food. I've never had a homemade ketchup that I've enjoyed. And it's not that I don't think homemade, like house-made ketchup is objectively like worse or anything like that. I think, again, I've just been raised or gaslit to believe that Heinz ketchup is what ketchup is, right? So it just falls out of that rubric. Do you ever see this on your end where maybe you're showing somebody a black peppercorn that you're making or some other spice and they just don't know what to do with it because they've just been eating the sawdust version of that the entire day? And like, what do you think of that? Like, yeah.
Yeah, we literally print on our boxes, start with half as much as your recipe calls, because we've had too many people like use our ginger and it's a really spicy, intense ginger. And they're like, you ruined my recipe. And I'm like, no, your horrible spices ruined the recipe that you were using before.
Right.
So we've seen things like people have these strong reactions to both like our cinnamons, royal cinnamon being like a classic spicy, sweet Vietnamese cinnamon that often you don't kind of get with the same intensity, or a cinnamon verum, which comes from Zanzibar, but is originally the Sri Lankan cinnamon and is also the primary cinnamon used in kind of like Mexican cuisine. And anytime using cinnamon in a savory sense, we see people having strong emotional reactions to that. And same with the cumin, where we call it wild mountain cumin. It's a type of black cumin that grows there. So a lot of people have been using cumin their whole lives in America, but really what their parents were cooking with or what they had growing up was this other varietal of cumin, this black cumin. And they try that and they're like, oh, this is the flavor. This is the thing that tastes like my aunt's or my parents or my whatever grandma's, dish that she used to make. And then we really try to like hold people's hands with some of this. So for example, black lime is a classic Persian ingredient. You throw a whole lime in these long braises and it breaks down and gives us like sour, savory kind of flavor to everything. We grind it into a powder and we try to anchor it in things that people know how to use. So we're just like, use this anywhere where you use a squeeze of lemon or lime, just use this as a finishing topping spice and start there. And we find that once people have their like anchor recipe, they're able to kind of take it from there and run with it. We have this really great sun-dried tomato powder and it's salty and minerally. And that's what the tomatoes are pulling out of the earth. We're just like, use this where you do salt and just see what happens. And all of a sudden they kind of get it, something clicks and they go from there. But that's something we think about all the time because it's so hard to educate. To like, if you're like, I don't know, I don't use coriander because I don't know how to make Indian food or whatever, like broad kind of thing like that, you're not going to learn a whole new cuisine to learn a new spice. So we're like, how can we bring this into something you know and love? And often it's beans, it's eggs, it's veggie or meat rubs, it's like blended soups and things like that. And we're like, you know this. Start there, and then the world is your oyster.
And Mike, may I, Ori, it's great to listen to you. I want to tell you a little story that happened to me just today. This morning, I was telling the guys earlier on, I was in Milan for a business meeting, and this was with a major vertical farming company. And we're starting to talk about collaborating and this and that. And to your point, Ori, I was listening to you. This morning we were talking about they grow these specific green leaves that come from, I don't know, I'll tell you, rucola, wasabi rucola, for example, right? And the guy, the CTO and co-founder of the company, is extremely knowledgeable about this. He was explaining to me how they algorithmically can control growth. And by the way, to your point about spices, I see vertical farming evolving in 50 years from now into being algorithmically controlled terroir generation. And I know Mike is going to like this, but the thing is, so to me, to your point, what we're seeing is anybody experimenting with introducing authentic, very intense flavor components derived from enhancing certain properties of in this case, of a leafy green, and trying to imagine these guys trying to sell rucola, wasabi rucola in Italy, where exactly you would have people saying, hey, I don't do sushi at home. I don't, it's like, no, wait, you don't understand. This is meant to go into whatever you're currently doing with certain rucolas or certain salads. So I just wanted to add that, in my opinion, the evolution of flavor perception and the interaction with technology, which was a point that we discussed quite at length in today's conversation, is somewhat connected to what you were describing, Ori, which is the beauty of the original bioregional food system from where a certain spice or product comes. And my question to all of us is, should we be encouraging the idea that we can algorithmically reproduce terroirs in a vertical farm so that we can have cinnamon and introduce that to in a certain way to a local culture so that everybody can appreciate it? What is that going to do to the place in nature, if I want to use a very kind of Ptolemaic version of the universe vision of spices? Like you said, nobody should be expecting saffron to grow in Nebraska. And so, what is technology going to do to that? And is that something we should be desiring? How much of that is going to have an impact on those people, those very real people you were talking about, those farmers in Vietnam? So, this idea that the bioregional food system, from a neuroscience and cultural perspective that we study, is in fact the emotion of a cultural community in learning to appreciate food and flavor as an expression of meaning and culture and bioregional identity of somebody else. Is that something we're interested in preserving? Is that a romanticized version of the future of flavor? Or is flavor actually, and Mike and Ali are going to laugh at me again for this reference, but is it going to be a political tool? That as I get into the night here in Italy, I tend to become more political and Marxist as I tend to have a low sugar level in my blood. But really, to me, the thing is, I'm hearing you talking about those farmers in Vietnam being helped and paving the roads and all of that. And I'm thinking, that's a social political issue that is actually touched upon by transporting a flavor experience to a different world. So how are we going to be doing that in the future? That's really cool.
The thing I was thinking about as Ori was talking is, I'm so certain that Burlap and Barrel would have failed so spectacularly in 1992. You guys would have gotten stuck on sun-dried tomato, and the American culinary populace would be like, all right, we've learned our lesson for the decade. Thank you for introducing the one new flavor that we had bandwidth to understand and contextualize. We'll see you in the early aughts. And Mario, what you're talking about of where can all of this go, and should we what can we derive from pondering what happens when you uproot something that has only ever been in one place and take it elsewhere, and what effects could that have, good and bad? I don't know. All of these things are so stacked on so many different degrees of uncertainty and variability and chaos. I do think, though, that the engine that feeds all of that, if we're going to go in any of those directions, the engine that feeds all of that is the fact that I think pretty definitively our average plasticity and ability to learn about food is increasing. Like our per capita, maybe not adventurousness, but like the speed of the learning curve. Even if you are only a person who is going to eat potatoes and bread for the rest of your life, your ability to understand and appreciate different things, even just about that very narrow set of foods, I think is very different than our parents' capacity for change. It's almost like our ability for food empathy regardless of what your specific food habits are, your ability to learn and your ability to and your opportunity, both your ability and your opportunity are being augmented in terms of being able to get a grasp of, figure out something new. And I think ultimately that is a powerful force for progress and improvement in whatever chaotic direction we end up needing to move.
Totally.
It's
And
a great
if I may,
point.
go ahead, Mario.
No, please go ahead. I was just nodding in awe, and there's so much to be said about it. But please, Ori.
I just want to say that we're seeing also the world become a smaller place too, and like the distances between places. It used to be that if you wanted to build, let's say, a spice company or any importing company, you'd have field offices and people and multi-language and these crazy systems to move money around and all that stuff that was just so difficult to kind of make it happen. We've been able to get money into Afghanistan even without the whole like international banking system kind of supporting it. We've been able to, move things across countries. It's been really, we were surprised at how much we're able to move things across. And people ask us, is it blockchain that you're able to have traceability? Is it automation that you're able to do? It's like, no, it's Google Translate and it's like WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger. And so there's something about the proliferation of kind of low cost technology that now every farmer we talk to has a smartphone and can blast off messages to us at whatever hour they want to, in whatever language they want to, and we can receive it, understand it, and then kind of message back to them. We still do a lot of in-person things. When we first met our partner farmers in Vietnam, they were like, no, we'll give you the blended cinnamon. Like that's what you want. That's what everybody wants. And we're like, no. We want the best, oldest, highest quality. And they didn't believe us, I guess, in a while, because they're used to kind of working with all these intermediaries that are always pushing them on price and are so willing to sacrifice quality for price, because the more they can push down price, the more they can build margin. So all I'm trying to say is that the world feels like it's becoming a smaller and smaller place. We're more and more connected to people, even in very rural areas, which, farms by default happen in rural places. And so barriers around language, around distance, around currency, around all these other things feel like they're being collapsed. And now you want to try Vietnamese cinnamon, we can bring you to the field where the cinnamon is grown. You can hear from a farmer with real-time translation and all these other things. I think that is half of the reinforcing loop that's also making people more adventurous, because if you in the mid 90s tried to do whatever, we'd get stuck exporting it. We'd have to build a field office and we'd have to bring a this and a that, and who knows where it would go. And now we have all the infrastructure, and now you can learn about it too. So I think that I really agree with your point. I think it'll keep growing.
Well, so earlier we talked, our Ali and I talked about how the fact that geopolitics and flavor are actually closer related than many people mostly think. I think if you were born in the last 50 years, you probably take that for granted, because geopolitics was such that, in the States, you could kind of just get anything you want, right? But it wasn't always that way. Looking ahead is like, or you referenced some of the things about, tariffs and things like that, making things difficult. Do you think that like the idea that we might just tariff the crap out of everyone else in the world and close her off to spices, does that put more credence to the fact that we're going to have to find alternatives for things, grow things in a controlled environment? I thought about the vanillin, the artificial vanilla that was, created, where you theoretically don't need to go anywhere where they actually grow vanilla, right? So I don't know, like what's your thought on kind of, can single origin kind of heirloom spices coexist in a world with things that are synthetic or things that are just alternative from everything from sugar to spice and everything nice?
Yeah, I think that we have so far to go to still understand flavor and components of flavor. Every time you look into all these like studies of why does this taste better this way, they're like, oh, well, it's because of thousands of compounds that we don't even understand and don't even have names for yet. There's still something magical happening in nature, that I think hasn't been totally replicated or understood. And anyways, I think that these, spices are such a kind of window into culture and travel and history and all these like there's such a encapsulation of not just the ingredient itself, but a way of cooking, and what that way of cooking is tied to, like what economic prosperity, what were the ingredients available in those places and all of that. And so I think the goal is not to flatten it, but I think that our world should be more interconnected, and we should be able to travel even culinarily to so many different parts of the world and have that be within reach, versus trying to repatriate and all of that. And I think that the more that we look at the American even food system, like apple pie is based on cinnamon that doesn't grow in America. You know, vanilla ice cream is based on vanilla, and sure, we can do the vanilla extract and all that, but there's such a beautiful story and heritage and depth of flavor to that kind of ingredient.
Hey, ask a question, Mike.
Go for it.
To all of you, again, it's getting darkingly Marxist. But the thing is, I have a question though, because I think the general mood and what we're trying to say, it's a great thing. There is this plasticity socially and culturally where people are open and willing and able to learn more about and being exposed to different spices and products and flavors. Is there a limitation to the fact that we're looking into a 10 billion humans planet and we're pushing on the pedal to say, oh, let's get everyone to know and appreciate and want to consume vanilla or tomato? Is there a sense where unless we also look at the technological component, which again, I try to explain, I'm not a huge fan necessarily of, but how much of the exotic taste for learning new taste is actually going to become a product? So something that is going to then be massified and therefore induce a certain system of production that is inherently not very sustainable. And Ori, specifically, the question is to try to be a little more down to earth and less theoretical. Do you ever fear that a huge success of your company, let me put it in a paradoxical way, is going to actually unbalance the delicate balance of those bioregional food systems where you're sourcing your spices? Do you see a problem with actual capacity? And how much of that is in contrast with our idea of, oh, let's democratize, 10 billion people should have top quality cinnamon? Is that possible? Is that going to be a good thing?
I'll tell you this. This is, I think that as the idea of this education and this growth and appreciation of spices, they're built into so many cultures already, and it's just about improving farming techniques and methods and kind of incentivizing it too. Because I think that as you have like more flavorful spices, you need to use less. Like better food comes from better food systems. It doesn't have to just be more expensive for the sake of it. And I think that part of it also is as more people get into more flavors, we'll see kind of a fragmentation of supply chain and of interests and of that, as we've seen, like how much of our supply chain is based off of like the top 10 like crops and livestock and all of that. Let's get into the niches. Let's get into all the different versions of it and all the different, there's so much heritage, there's so much things, but I think as things become mass, it kind of collapses all of that onto fewer and fewer things. In terms of our spice farmers, we always have been like, are we gonna like hit some kind of maximum? And we're not growing like a technology company. We're growing like a sustainable agricultural company. Like we're not 10xing every year and going crazy, nor do we want to. We have found that as we've been able to grow, a few things have happened. One is some of the new growth is spread across a bigger tail of more spices. And so like not everything is concentrated in our top like 8 or 10 spices, like the cinnamon, the cumin, the garlic, the chilies, and things like that. And then the second thing is that our partner farmers have been able to grow alongside us. We give them kind of a long heads up. We do annual planning because it's around how much do you plant and how much land. And like our partner paprika farmer has been like taking over more land from his neighbors and all of that, or kind of hiring them in there. Our partner farmer that's doing fermented white peppercorns brought in 2 of his neighbors. Our partner cooperative in Zanzibar has added more farmers into the cooperative. So to me, this is more about converting kind of low cost, crappy industrial farmland into higher producing, higher value kind of farmland. And so I think that this is more about reshuffling resources than kind of pulling from a specific pool of resources that once it's tapped, it's tapped. So that's where this is not like, draining oil or bringing salt out of the earth. This is something that's much that is actually moving us to a different form relationship with our food and our agriculture and our farming and our land use and all of that. So I think this is a really nice virtuous cycle that it's creating.
So Ori, I have one last question for you before I do a little rapid fire tradition that we have with everybody. It's not a spice, but like sweet as a flavor seems to be after salt, probably, at least in America, but probably a lot of places, the most popular one. And I've lived enough to see just so many iterations of alternative sweeteners and different things like that. Like, are there more things to riff on with that? Like, how are we going? What's the future of sweetness look like?
Yeah, I think that sugars in particular are not a thing we have any transparency into. And like everyone was freaking out a couple of years ago when it was like, oh, sugars are filtered through bone char, so they're technically not vegan, and everyone had like a meltdown. And so like I think that most of us don't even know, is our sugar coming from cane? Is it coming from sugar beets? Is it coming from like there's such a world there with even less transparency than most of the other ingredients in our kitchen. So we are starting to source single origin sugars that are going back to farmers. And there's also this like kind of production processing step in sugars. And so how do you do minimally processed whole ingredients that aren't with this like obsessive, like, how do we just like bring out the white shelf stable kind of pure like sucrose, glucose kind of thing out of it? And so we are really interested in sweeteners. And also like, what about low glycemic sweeteners around date sugars, and what about the world of kind of coconut sugar and maple sugar and things like that? So again, I think like in us, it's not about going down this main alley, but actually broadening the way people think about it. Honeys too has been one of the most adulterated foods that Americans have. And so how do we bring kind of this transparency into honey? These are so critical to other farming activities too, in terms of pollination, in terms of productivity of fields and all of that. So to me, I think that sugars has gone so far in the direction of high fructose corn syrup or all these like sugar alternatives and all of that. And what we're betting on is that people will want kind of these more whole ingredients in terms of sweeteners that have a lot of the minerals and more than molasses that create this much more interesting and rich flavors, and a tie back to origin. And I think that will hopefully change our relationship from sugar as this kind of invisible ingredient that's just kind of pumping up the sweetness of everything in our lives.
Well, coming back to coffee, I almost can it's totally plausible to see a third wave of sugar, right? Which sounds so funny because knowing how much, especially in the West, people love to beat on top of sugar. But um,
Absolutely.
that it kind of feels like coffee in the Dunkin' Donuts heyday and the Hills Brothers heyday, right? It was just kind of like one thing and nobody really asked any questions about it. And now look at us. We've got all of these different things. Okay, so we have a little tradition here on this show. We ask everybody, and anybody could jump in first, but I want to hear from all of you before we sign off. Is if you had a crystal ball and it could tell you anything about the future of flavor, what would you ask it? Ali, you want to start?
Yeah, I have a very selfishly motivated one. We have seen this carousel of each of the main macronutrients: fats, carbohydrates, and then within that sugar, and even micronutrients like salt. There's this carousel where one falls out of favor. Like the right segment airs on daytime TV, the right blogger takes up arms, the right study is published and then maybe sometimes misquoted, and all of a sudden you have the fat freak out of the 90s, the carb freak out of the early aughts, the sugar freak out that we're in now, which by the way is ebbing, and we're seeing that a lot. This is just kind of a dumb thing. I really want to know, are we ever going to have a falling out with protein? I've been wondering this forever. Is there going to be something?
In 2 years, we will.
Yeah, is there going to be something where it's like people are getting kidney stones because they're eating 300 grams of protein a day and they don't need
Oh,
that?
they will very soon.
So I would love to know about that, and then I cannot wait until the first protein-free bar is marketed.
So it's a little note of how the sausage is made here on this podcast. We film these out not in real time, and so this episode will air a little bit after, not immediately. The episode that's about to, by now for listeners, it already came out like 4 weeks ago, is about the future of proteins. So
I'm very curious.
yeah, so you'll get to listen to that, but I love that as a provocation. Okay, Mario, Ori, what would you ask your crystal ball about the future?
If I may, I will ask my crystal ball whether flavor will be a factor in keeping humans diverse. What will be the social role of flavor? I would ask my crystal ball that question. Will it even play a role?
Wait, go a little. Is that coming back to the what we talked about versus how you like one coffee and Ellie likes another? Like,
More like, will people ever be aware of the fact that the way they experience flavor has a lot to do who they are and understanding themselves and
I see.
others? And so for me, I would like to ask my crystal ball, will we ever get to an age where flavor will be promoted to being something more than just a sort of a half-shrouded mystery of hedonic, crazily staged experiences, sometimes in Michelin star restaurants? And will it be more like an integral part of living through life and then sharing meaning with other people?
Love that. Love that. Ori, take us home.
I'm really curious about right now because of all the conversations about international versus domestic and all that. I asked the crystal ball, like, is America gonna like develop its own domestically sourced and built kind of approach to flavor based on these ingredients? Because so many of even the most popular flavors here come from elsewhere, right? What's the true American non-imported flavor and taste and palate based on American ingredients? Like, I know we have Syracuse salted potatoes, but like I wonder, like, what's like will we kind of move into our own kind of firmly rooted in the soil kind of identity based on things that have grown and produced here, which is what I'm really curious to watch.
You blew my mind earlier when you said something that is so obvious, but I just never thought of it. The fact that apple pie, as American as apple pie, and that apple pie is made with cinnamon from a different continent. And maybe that's the funny metaphor of America, right? Is that we are the melting pot, and sometimes we just forget
Yeah.
that it was a melting pot. So, thanks again, everyone, for this panel. This was a great host of cast of characters to come here and talk about the future of flavor. You guys are all very actively in the mode of building the future of flavor. So, what better source than to get from you guys? So, thank you all so much for joining me, and thank you to our listeners for staying on with us. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys later. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, Mike. Bye, everybody.
Now, here's a bonus interview I had with Mette Johnsen. She's the CEO of Spora. Spora is the R&D lab tied to Alchemist, the groundbreaking restaurant with chef Rasmus Monk in Copenhagen. We talked all things flavor, and especially about their approach to using flavor to unlock the hidden value in food. Okay, I'm thrilled to welcome Mette Johnsen, CEO of Spora. Spora is a groundbreaking global food research center that's reimagining how we feed the world. Spora was founded in 2023 by renowned chef Rasmus Monk as an evolution of Copenhagen's revolutionary restaurant Alchemist, and it tackles our biggest food challenges with one radical philosophy of deliciousness comes first. They're doing so many cool things, including turning food waste into culinary gold, from chocolate alternatives without cocoa to unlocking protein that could sustainably feed millions of people annually. Mette, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you, Mike. I'm doing well, thanks. And thank you for having me. Very excited.
Let's start. Good to have you here. Let's start at the beginning, maybe. When you and Rasmus kind of, what was the gap you guys saw in the food world that sort of led to you creating Spora out of the Alchemist R&D kitchen?
Yeah, so what we saw, what we experienced more was that there was, as part of the Alchemist team, an R&D team that was working with building blocks for food, serving the test kitchen, which then develops delicious experiences, dishes to eat in Alchemist. But they were kind of in the back doing new inventive things, ingredients, flavors, and so on. And what we saw was that there was actually a lot of interest from the outside world, from companies, from universities, and so on to collaborate. So they were really tapping into that creativity and inventiveness that there is in the back of a restaurant like the Alchemist. And then we started to think about, what gap is it actually what is the need that we are serving, or role that we're serving that's not already covered? And from that, we gathered that this crossover between gastronomy and science, and being able to intersect those two ways of working and perspectives on food and on ingredients and flavor was two worlds that were meeting, and we were good at making them connect and translate to each other and some transition. So what we saw was this need for bringing the creativity and this forward into the futureness of avant-garde cuisine.
Yeah.
Connecting that with the innovation and the science that's taking place today. So that was sort of the core of what we wanted to bring into the mix, and the role we want to fill really is to bridge science and gastronomy and create a creative space there that can take the inventiveness from the restaurant, but then also bring it to scale.
Yeah, yeah. And a lot of your projects currently are really heavily focused on kind of sustainability related issues, right? So, talk a little bit about why kind of pleasure and flavor is so critical to the sustainability equation, because I think that's unfortunately sometimes lost in the equation when people talk about sustainable food. They talk about carbon, they talk about this and that, but it's really this deliciousness that unlocks the value. Can you kind of talk about how you guys approach that?
Yes, I love to. Yeah, so I think it's coming from the heart of chefs that the food is love, and it has to be wonderful and really serve all your senses in a holistic sense. Really be both have great flavors and textures and for create something that we can come together around. And when we think about sustainability, we talk a lot about CO2 imprint and switching towards plant-based and so on. And we want to do all those things. We think that foods of the future should be sustainable. It should be healthy for us. We shouldn't forget that on an individual basis. Our health and the health of our families is always going to be close to us and closer to us than a consideration of a more abstract environmental issue. It should also be affordable, because otherwise it's not going to be sustainable if we can attain it again and again. And then it has to be delicious. And I think what we have seen over the past, let's say, 10 years, where we have been riding at least the first wave of more plant-based foods and protein alternatives and so forth, that to get the stickiness and to get us to choose new foods again and again over something that we already love and like and associate with love and associate with great family meals and so on, associate with comfort, we have to put deliciousness first. And that's also why, again, we intersect science with chefs, because we really want the chef's perspective to be part of the early stages of innovation when we design and invent and choose new technologies. So for us, we actually believe that the true vehicle for a green transition is actually to put deliciousness and flavor first and make that drive our choices.
Yeah. I always say the reason why deliciousness leads everything is that there's a lot of foods out there that are just purely delicious but have no redeemable health or sustainability benefits, and they make billions of dollars a year. Which tells you that if you can only have one of the three, deliciousness leads it. Well, so maybe one example to kind of bring this to light for listeners is the project you guys have been doing with the rapeseed oil cakes, or in America we call it canola. But you've done something upcycling the leftovers after making rapeseed or canola oil. And I think it was interesting what you guys kind of approached to it, because that was kind of a thing that is available protein there, but nobody was eating it because it doesn't really taste right. So it almost was like you guys had to work to say, how can we unlock the value of upcycling by actually getting people to want to eat it? Like, can you talk up a little bit about that project?
Sure. Yeah. So we have had quite a strong focus on side streams from the industry. One of them in particular being these oil cakes that you have left after pressing seeds or kernels, and in particular the canola press cake, because it's such a huge volume of material that we have there that we don't, as you're saying, don't even consider as a food today, as a human food. We use it for feed or for energy. There's two reasons that are associated that we don't eat it. It is very bitter, and it really doesn't look like a food. It looks more like something you'd feed a rabbit. Then there are also these bitter compounds are also what we call anti-nutritional factors. So if you took and ate it today untreated, it could, if you ate a lot, affect how your thyroid works. So it could actually suppress your ability to take in nutrition. And this is not a recommendation to use as a diet. It would be very bad, but it does actually stop you from fully taking up the nutrients of your food.
So it's not just a flavor thing. There's a nutrition unlock in play.
Yeah, so there has to be a conversion, a transformation of it to make it edible. Now, that's not unusual for humans to do that. A potato is a good example of something we eat every day that you should boil. That's also transformation, making it edible. Or yams, same thing. So it's not unusual in that sense for humans to have done that. And we're doing that again with a different methodology. So we're using fermentation as a treatment to break down those unwanted compounds. And then we formulate it into a new food. And what's really nice about rapeseed cake is that it has beautiful protein. It has what we call a gold standard protein, a plant protein that's as good as a soy protein, which is really the best in plants nutrition-wise. And what's also good is that there's so much of it. There's more than 80 million tons of it out there of rape seeds being produced, and then you have all this fresh cake left. And if we took all that protein out, we could feed more than 500 million of people theoretically if we took the protein and converted it from this leftover side stream into human foods. So really it holds a lot of potential. So that's why we wanted to focus on that. Then we developed an alternative to meat that's super versatile. We can formulate it into a patty and you can use a hamburger, or you can use it for bolognese. Now it's late spring in Denmark, so we have peas and asparagus and beautiful flowers here right now. So right now we're turning it into a kind of spring salad with these elements of rapeseed cake. The product we do right now is what's also really nice is that it's a 5-ingredient formulation. So we can also do it in a way where we avoid these very long ingredient lists and additives and so on. So really we can bring out the flavor, you can say, directly from the raw material, which I think is really nice.
And that's on the menu at Alchemist currently too? Okay, that's awesome. As the salad, right? You said, yeah.
As a salad, yeah.
You know, our listeners are pretty sophisticated in the food world, so I don't need to deep dive on why fermentation is interesting. I think it's been well established that fermentation is really interesting. But why do you think it's kind of had a resurgence, right? It's not new, obviously, but it seems like in the last, let's call it decade or 15 years, it's at the forefront of technique that everyone's talking about again. So I don't know, what do you think is going into this sort of resurgence in the conversation around fermentation?
So that's a favorite topic, and I think we can see from a couple of different perspectives. So first of all, fermentation is a very traditional way for humans of creating flavor and preserving foods. And so we have these different cultural traditions from all over the world. Now these fermentation techniques are really traveling with different cuisines to different areas. And I think if we look towards Copenhagen, for example, we have the new Nordic cuisine and all these restaurants that came out and really used fermentation techniques, not only from the Nordics, but also really tapped into Asian ways of fermenting. So I think on the gastronomic scene, there's been a huge interest and cultural exchange and learning going on as there was a lot of focus on this more avant-garde cuisine developments. And that's kind of spreading out into the more mainstream of the restaurants. Then coming with a background from the industry, if you look at what's going on in the bio industry, so all these new approaches to creating foods by fermentation, it's a different way of creating food by fermentation. I know you talked about it in previous episodes about converting sugars or CO2 or many other things into human foods, into proteins. And so the industry is also serving more and more solutions in food that are fermentation based, just industrial fermentation.
That's great, because I feel like this is this great trickle down effect happening between the alchemists and the nomas of the world, talking about fermentation, and it feels like it's finally trickling down to like mainstream FMCG products, and it's just kind of surrounding it. But like, what are some of these advantages? Because you guys aren't just some random group of chefs in a kitchen. You guys are tied to Alchemist, arguably one of the best well-known best restaurants in the world. Like, what kind of advantages does that have for Spora being tied to something so kind of prominent out there, and you can always get a captive audience? Like, how do you guys leverage that?
So I have two answers to that, because I wanted just to say to stay on the fermentation part. So why is fermentation so exciting to build on in an environment like Alchemist and Spora? What it really offers is it's new ways, and it's exciting flavors that we didn't even know existed that we can discover. So really, fermentation and using, for example, traditional fermentation techniques on a new substrate or a new ingredient can create something that the world has never seen before. So that makes it extremely exciting for us to work with fermentation to really unlock something that doesn't exist today. And I can give a couple of examples of that.
Yes, please.
So we've been working with, now we get some funny names. We've been working with a fungus called Neospora intermedia.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bright orange fungus that would traditionally kind of be something that occurs when you had a forest fire. So maybe you have seen, or people have seen, that after a fire, when you have all these charred woods, you get these funny funguses growing initially. They could be sort of this very bright orangey color. It's that type of fungus. It's used traditionally in Indonesia to convert the soy press cake from pressing soy into a protein food. Now we took that fungus and tried to apply it to other substances. And when we used it on rice, it really unlocked from rice these beautiful tropical fruit, pineapple, lychee aromas and flavors that you would just never have expected.
Wow.
So without having actually experimented, taking the chef's experimental approach, we would not have discovered that these flavors were there. We were collaborating at that time with Vayo Mani-Hill, a scientist at that time on Berkeley, who then also screened this fungus to see why does it have this ability to produce such beautiful flavors, and identified the enzymes that this fungus has to break down the rice in a way that flavor is created. So fermentation really offers a vehicle to experiment and discover something completely new. And I think that's extremely exciting. So that was the first answer. And then you asked what it offers to us to be associated with Alchemist. And I think what it offers many wonderful things. Of course, the fact that the light is shining on Alchemist as an exceptional place for rethinking food and for rethinking what a restaurant can be, a restaurant experience. But then there's also something about the pace of how a restaurant works and works creatively to bring something new forward. You always have to put something exciting on the menu every night, and you cannot kind of have a bad day and go home, which you could do in a lab. So it really creates that nerve and that propels us forward, even if we're trying to solve challenges that reside outside the restaurant sphere.
That is true. Yeah, it's like every single night is the Olympics for you all. But it goes both ways, because you have a captive audience every night, and you can try new things out. I think they're expecting you to push, right? You can't just serve spaghetti and meatballs and call it a day. Like, it's got to be something that pushes and pushes. One of the things that Alchemist has been known for is kind of obviously the food, but all the other things that aren't the food that go into the experience. Like, so, for people that haven't been to Alchemist, can you kind of describe how that all adds up to something that is kind of marvelous, right? Because you're not just putting the plate on the table and walking away. There's a lot more to it.
So I think it's even hard for me to describe with words, because I think it's such an immersive and comprehensive experience that you really kind of have to feel it in your body. But it's really bringing elements of a restaurant that that you are familiar with. So you eat something, you drink something, you have the narrative around it, but bringing it together with theater and with surprises and sound, and how all these different aspects of the experience affect you and affect also your experience, for example, of flavor, your experience of what you eat. And then also adding in there different notches or narratives that tie the different dishes or experiences, impressions, as we call it, with something that relates to the outside world. So, for example, there's a dish on surveillance.
Surveillance.
Yeah.
Yes. Tell me more.
Yeah. So how do you get a dish on surveillance? So it's served in and it's also hard to call it a plate, but let's call it, for the sake of it, a plate that's shaped as an eyeball.
The eyeball, yes.
The eyeball.
Yes.
And you get a spoon and you then eat the center of the eye, the pupil, and it's a lobster tartare with a gel of cod eye, caviar, and a cracker and all the delicious elements. And you literally had to, with the spoon, sort of have the sensation and also physically that you're cracking through the eye. Yeah, and then you eat that. It's delicious.
It pulls you into a story, right? Because you could have plated that any number of different ways, like very, simply. But I love that you very purposefully don't refer to them as dishes. You call them impressions. And after seeing something like the eyeball, I can see why, right? Because it is a full impression, not a plate of food alone.
And adding to that, as you are experiencing or eating this dish or impression, you are sitting in a 360-degree dome or planetary style above you, which is exposing different video content throughout the night of your dinner. One of them also being on surveillance. So it's all kind of being tied together through the night. What you're seeing from you enter to you exit, not necessarily massively at one time, but sort of these notches that they come, okay, now we have the content on surveillance. I can see myself and wave at the camera.
Yeah.
I have the dish on
I frequently, I want to hear what your thoughts are on this, because I frequently think about this analogy that I have in my head, which is that fine dining restaurants like your restaurant that are able to innovate so heavily, they're sort of like high fashion houses that do sort of the avant-garde fashion shows, right? And, only a certain, percentage of, you only have so many seats at your restaurant. You can't serve the whole world in there. However, you kind of serve this like smaller audience with some really ambitious things. And then maybe there's like some things from some fashion show 10 years ago that end up on a rack in an H&M or something very like accessible. Like, do you see that potential for some of the innovations that come out to you, going from super fine dining today, but maybe down the road it could be something valuable that, I don't know, Americans might find at Walmart or something like that? Like, what's that connection feel like to you?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's a very sort of strong impetus of what we want to do, is really to take that creativity, also very specifically things that have been developed in Alchemist or in other restaurants for that sake. Of course, see and understand how to bring them out to make them valuable and appreciated in the mainstream setting. But that is really what we also want to do. And I think you mentioned it earlier. We're working on a chocolate alternative, which was a project that also started in Alchemist. And that's something that we're now scaling and to really bring it out to the world. So we are right now scaling at 50 kilos per batch, and within this year we'll be scaling to 500 kilos.
Talk a little bit more about that, because we've been talking on our side about like this, cocoa, we're having a shortage, right? And people are rushing to find that. Can you explain a little bit more about the cocoa project?
Definitely. And in the context of flavor, I think that there's also that we have a need, we have a necessity to focus on flavor for many reasons going forward, as we were talking about, because it's a necessary vehicle for us to make good choices food-wise. But there's also something about climate pressure on different climate zones, including where you grow cocoa, but also citrus fruits, bananas, and so on. So we are actually looking into a future where we need, if we want to enjoy these foods and these experiences that we love, we also have to think about how can we keep doing that, and if it becomes limited in supply, how can we mimic the experience that we love, but doing it in a way where it can stand in its own right, being equally or more delicious. So you can say, how can we mimic without copying? Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. Well, because I feel like so much of like the let's go the alternative meat kind of industry right now, and I get why they do it, but it's so focused on copying something that exists to be an analog, right? I always, like Impossible Burger, Beyond Burger is literally a burger, right? And they're like, everybody knows what that is, but it's plant-based, versus something like I think about like when was the first time somebody invented tofu? Like it was never meant to replace anything else. It wasn't an emulator. Somebody just said, here's this thing, it's tofu, and it's new, right? And we haven't really invented like a brand new food category like that in a really long time. And I guess that's sort of what you guys are chipping away at, right? Like
we're trying to, and I think what we're trying to retain is that you were saying initially that we choose delicious foods even when they're not good for us. So again, we know that there's when we eat chocolate, there's something that's really satisfying and pleasurable about chocolate. So what we actually did was that we kind of broke down what is it that makes this experience so wonderful. What does it look like? It's shiny. I like that. What is it when you break it, or has this great snap? So that's a really important feature of chocolate. What is it like when? What are the aromas like? How does it melt in the mouth? What is sort of the melting profile? What kind of flavors do you experience? How does it melt away and disappear, and then still retain this lingering taste? So really, sort of thinking about the chocolate experience. What is it like? And then seeing how can we mimic that experience in a new way, so to say. So that's what we've been trying to do with the chocolate project that we call Snap. So we are using other ingredients than cocoa, different elements than cocoa, different elements than the cocoa butter. One key ingredient for us has been the brewer's spent grains. So what you have left after you kind of extract the sugars for beer production, because it has also deep flavors. You can roast it, and you can get deep roasted malty flavors. And then we also use legumes, beans, which also provide some really nice nutty flavors. And really try to again mimic the experience, but with a new flavor profile. So it's interesting that quite often when people taste it, they will say, "Oh, I wouldn't even recognize that it's not chocolate," when you don't tell them, because the experience is very alike. But then also, when you then know and you eat it, you can say, okay, I recognize that the flavor profile is different, but the experience is very like.
I love that approach of sort of taking a food and looking at the experience and breaking it down to the first principles of what makes that. Like, you think chocolate has a certain mouthfeel to it, and then you sort of think, how many things can deliver that mouthfeel, and that's really fun. And I think that's such an important thing, especially as climate changes and chocolate. We had an earlier conversation earlier in the season where one of our guests was talking about how climate is changing at a pace that in 50 years, our wine regions in the world could be completely different. Like Denmark could be Bordeaux, heaven forbid. All right, I don't want to be too doomerish, but yeah. Yeah. I think that's scary, but also a little interesting and exciting. Like I just start to imagine all these states in America that aren't California that could maybe one day be creating really good wine 50 years from now. Well, and thinking towards the future, maybe not 50 years, but I want to hear your vision around, like, let's say 10 years, 2035. If Spora and Alchemist, if you're able to kind of execute and nail all your visions and all your goals and all your dreams can come true, what do you think your imprint on the world of food might look like in a decade if everything goes perfectly for you?
That's a beautiful question. Thank you. I think the overall, you can say, theme or achievement that we would hope to have created would be that alchemists, but also in a broader sense, chefs are part of and have made a difference in using flavor and using the creativity for good. So help us move from choosing delicious food that are maybe not so healthy for us, not sustainable, to really use the force of deliciousness for good. So really helping us in transitioning towards the right choices for the planet, for our health, and also for a beautiful food experience. That's what we really want to do, to make a difference for millions and millions of people through deliciousness. So that's what we hope, and I think with that, I think a call out as well to chefs that can really play an important role, an even bigger role than they do today in actually creating a better world.
And doing it on the backs of deliciousness. So that's really all about using flavor to unlock the hidden value of food, nutritionally, sustainably, experientially, all that kind of stuff. Okay, well, that's a beautiful vision, and I hope we stay in touch to see that vision come to fruition in a decade, which I'm sure will come faster than we think. Thank you so much for your time today. It was really great to take time out of your busy schedule to be with me, and really appreciate the interview.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Tomorrow Today Show. The Tomorrow Today Show is a production of the Spoon Podcast Network, with writing, hosting, editing, and music by me, Mike Lee. Stay tuned for more episodes to come in Season 1.